All right, now it should work. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
How are you, man?
Doing good, doing good. Looking forward to this.
Also, can you stop getting your account suspended or shadow banned even during your space, man?
You got to talk to Elon Musk about that, man.
What are you tweeting? I haven't looked at your account in a while. I know you cover the cartels, but like, what gory crap do you tweet?
So I think the last one was an edited picture of it was edited, right? But it showed a decapitated head on top of a cooler in Mexico that the cartels did. It was edited, so you don't see the gory part, but I think that's what got me shadow banned again. I'm like, oh,
God. So are you one of those guys that would go back in the day on live leak every day in the morning when you wake up over a cup of coffee?
The live leak now is called Telegram.
So live leak is gone, isn't it? The website is suspended, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. Everybody uses, like, the most part is Telegram. That's the main one. And then I do track them on social media, like Instagram, Facebook. Like, I have a lot of burner accounts. Ironically, like, the word, maybe not gore, but like TikTok, let's say you upload something, you put something on TikTok, and any inclination you're like in the cartel, they'll remove that video pretty quickly. But Instagram, they run amok.
Instagram is a lot stricter, yeah?
No, contrary. No. TikTok is way stricter than Meta. Like, Meta is atrocious. There's so many, and
no, but Meta is still stricter. It's still stricter than Twitter, no?
I no. Well, it depends. So, I would say the problem with Meta. So Twitter doesn't have groups, right? You can't do like a group. But a Meta, like Facebook, for example, there's actual groups of just like, yeah, they're all a bunch of like they'll send job recruitment ads on Facebook. Like, you could find recruitment ads to join a cartel on Facebook easily. It's not that hard. You just have to know where to look. And Instagram, they'll post like them, like actively known guys that I can confirm visually seen that are cartel members, and they're like, oh yeah, here's like 500 kilos of coke, no big deal, and they'll just upload it on Instagram like no biggie.
Man,
it's crazy. Why do you think they would allow that?
Because
I don't think they allow it. It's just very hard. I think censorship is really, we don't give them enough credit how difficult, because when they censor too much, they get shit. When they don't censor enough, they get shit. It's like they can never get it right.
I think Meta, the problem is they don't have good algorithms for foreign languages, right? Twitter in the beginning, when I first started this, Mexican Twitter was just insane. I mean, it was insane, the content that people could post on Twitter. Like, it was live leak. And I think Twitter caught up to it. And then now you start to see them like, okay, kind of cracking down. Instagram, Facebook, I would say the same. Like, you can't post gory content. But let's say TikTok, the moment they suspect like anything cartel related, it's automatically removed.
I'm just let me get a couple more things done before starting the space up. By the way, Slyman, the flight logs for Jeffrey Epstein were just released, so probably start digging into those and do a thread on them.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's going to be amazing.
That's going to be fun. There's more files being released on Epstein. I swear, if anyone, I avoid anything like Mexican drama type. When I say Mexican drama, I mean the Mexican TV shows. They're moving away from cartels. Like all these little dramatic things, I move away from these news. Epstein is exciting as fuck. Like the stuff I've been listening to and reading, man, this story is getting deeper and deeper. And I'm not talking about conspiracy stuff. I'm talking about things that, just pure facts being released and leaks coming out. Like, has anyone, for example, also, have you looked into how Epstein died or not?
Can I tell you something, Mario, that will freak you out? I was at an event in the Hamptons. Never actually said this in public, except the people that were with me. I was at an event at the Hamptons where Epstein, Trump, Sammy Sosa were together bidding on girls for rainforest charity.
Hold on. Sorry, who was there together? Sosa,
Sammy
Epstein,
Sosa,
and who?
Epstein, and Trump. We're at an event in a place called Willsey Castle. It's like this guy who's like the son of a banking tycoon. They were having an event where they were like
Sosa,
bidding,
the baseball guy. The baseball guy. Yeah,
the baseball player.
All right. Okay.
Anyway, it winded up being like the craziest 2 days of my life, where we winded up saving a girl from being auctioned off to some French guy, being chased by a madam who then was the daughter of like the top rabbi in New York. And I know this sounds like absolute craziness, but you've heard me on the space. I'm a very rational person. This actually happened to me in the craziest 2 days of my life.
Why were you there?
At the time, my mentor was the largest purchaser of Ferraris in New York, and Ferrari of Long Island was one of the sponsors of this rainforest charity, because what was going on outside was not what was going on inside. So I was invited to this party, and to get inside was $25K to where this was going on. The reason why I was invited in is because the PR manager, I think, took a liking to me. Although I am straight, he was very aggressive, and he's like, "Oh, come inside. It's, you don't have to pay to come in." I go to Philly all the time, so I'm originally from Philly. It was just a very, very, very strange night.
Cool, man. Well, and by the way, that doesn't mean they were all part of the bidding. Just to be
yeah, of course. I'm not saying
event.
Yeah, I'm not saying he bid. I never saw Trump bid. I never saw Epstein bid, but those men were there while bidding was taking place. Just to be clear.
Jesus, man. All right. Well, you should tell me more some of your stories. We could maybe bring them up in relevant spaces, because we're doing an Epstein space, and I had no idea you have the story. So it'd be good to discuss it there. All right, everyone. So we're gonna start doing daily spaces like this. And we're planning to kick it off. Oh shit, 2,000 people already here. So we didn't plan this.
So Mario, before you start though, so obviously this is the first space. Like, what's your thought process behind doing this? Because this is a bit different to your normal spaces, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm like, why not do a daily space? And my team's like, yeah, let's give it a shot. So I don't have much thinking goes on behind. Unlike you and Joa, you guys seem like you think everything through. I don't, man. I wake up, I decide something for no good reason, write it down, go back to sleep. So some things go to shit, some things work out.
So my thoughts behind why I thought you did this was because you basically have seen that the mainstream media is basically unreliable and just follows a specific narrative. And you wanted to hold a space every day to provide people with a more of a holistic view of what the news was. Is that not the case?
Yes, this is why. Yes, sounds much better than my answer. No, so this is why I'm doing the space. This is why I moved away from crypto and covering this. Why I'm doing it daily is just to give it the real reason. It's not what you said. The real reason is just to instead of always waiting for breaking news and then come up with themed topics, it's just interesting shit happening every day. Literally every day I wake up and there's just some cool shit, but not worth a whole space. But I thought if we put them all together, it's a good way to cover them. And then to all the spaces we do is like balance. We have people on both sides of every argument that come up, and including this panel right here. So it's kind of our thesis behind all the spaces. But the reason we're doing it daily is just as cool crap happening every day. Like, we're in the midst of a war in Ukraine, and where two superpowers, two nuclear powers are directly or indirectly involved, depending how you want to word it. And then there's tensions with the possibility of a war. We did a whole space on it yesterday between two other superpowers. One of them is the same, which is the US, and the other one's China. And there's very high tensions there. I think this is it's been decades we haven't had tensions that high relating to Taiwan. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. And then we've got other news that keep popping up here and there. Like in today's news, I did a thread on it. That's the last thing I tweeted just before the space. I'm not sure if a person wrote this thread or an AI. I didn't write it. But yeah, like just today, we're going to be covering escalations of the Ukraine war. We got China trying to lead the peace efforts in Ukraine, but then the US worried about China still supplying weapons to Russia, not still, to start supplying weapons to Russia. And then the third one is you got the US warning, yeah, to supplying Russia. Number 4 is Biden and the Surveillance Act, reauthorizing the Surveillance Act, which is really interesting because that's the battle between security and a freedom. And then the 5th one is Tate is back in the news with the reports that potentially he may have cancer. And Slam, and you've covered this in depth, so you probably will talk a lot about this. And of course, there's no day without Elon doing something. And he had a few tweets related to AI. One of them being, I used to like crypto, now I like AI, or something along those lines. And yesterday, the day before, he talked about building his own version of Chat GPT using Twitter data, which makes sense and makes Twitter's acquisition significantly more interesting. And then predicting that all cars in the future will be electric cars. So that's a segment on Elon. So that's in one day. That's yesterday. So look at doing these spaces. They can go on for 5 hours. They can go on for 30 minutes, just depending on what happened in the day. Could even do like a 20, 30-minute one to see if it goes well. That's pretty much it. So yeah, hope you all like it. Let me know in the comments, bottom right corner. Just let me know your feedback if you think it's a good idea, and then as we do those spaces, if you're enjoying them or not. But I think we're ready to kick it off. We've got Addy on stage. Addy, it's been a while. How are you? All right, you got to unmute your mic,
Hey,
Addy.
how's it going, Mario? Yeah.
Yeah, good, man. Good,
Okay?
good to see you, bro. Yeah, man. Yeah. I can see you, Addy.
Excellent. Yeah, good to see you back.
And we got.
Yeah, I'd love to talk Epstein whenever you guys talk Epstein.
Yeah, we got to do a space on
next
Epstein. Yeah.
The journalist kind of leading the way on that. So yeah.
Oh wow.
Great.
I had no idea. Let me get the team to connect us directly so we can discuss it via DMs as we prepare for that space. Daniel, good to see you again.
Thanks. It's good to be back. I appreciate being here.
I should have invited you to the space yesterday. We covered the China tensions, but we kind of pivoted a lot to Ukraine. It would have been good to have you. We've got our regulars. We've got Emergent here. We've got Joa. We also have Schizo and Troy are back. Schizo, Troy, how are you guys?
I'm good, Mario. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
Good, man. Good.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good as well. Just got done work.
Good, mate. Good. All right, bro. I'm gonna kick it off. So we got the first piece of news. Maybe Slimman, do you want to read the first one?
Yeah, sure. So the first one is about Russia. And before I start, from my perspective, what Mario said, that's the reason for this space. But more than that, we hope we can give everyone a holistic understanding of the news. And you don't get that in the mainstream media. So tune in every day and give us any kind of news that you think is worth covering. Right, coming on to the first one. Russia said on Thursday it was fighting off a terrorist attack in the southern Bryansk region bordering Ukraine, where the local governor said a Ukraine sabotage group had killed one person and a news agency said hostages had been taken. Ukraine accused Russia of staging a false provocation. One, Russia, which Putin called a terrorist attack. The armed men claimed to be Russian volunteers and called for an uprising. Putin vows to crush the Ukrainian sabotage group responsible for the attack, while Ukraine officials call all of this a story and a deliberate provocation. And
yeah, we've seen this. Yeah, so we've seen. What are your thoughts? Like maybe Slimman, you can kick it off. And I know Troy, Schizo, and Daniel will have a lot to say on this one, or even all sorts and Emergent probably have more to add. But like, does that seem like how can you tell if it's a false flag attack where you fake an attack to give a reason for something you've been planning to do? For example, fake an attack by Ukrainian soldiers within Russian territory to escalate the war in Ukraine. I'm just making up an example.
Yeah, I mean, we know, isn't it, based on prior wars and prior conflicts, this is possible. So it's possible that this happened, and it's also possible that it was faked. So we know, for example, there's been previous conflicts where there was claims of, for example, chemical attacks, or even recently in this case where the warhead went to Poland, and then the initial claim was that it was Russia, and then afterwards you found out it was Ukraine. Now that wasn't a false flag, and then there's been previous false flags in prior wars. So for this, it's possible it could be a false flag, or it could actually be because these things happen in war.
Yeah, jump in also and skip.
Yeah, so I'll go first, and then I'll pass it to Intel. So I know this is a thing that a lot of people have been tracking in the groups that we're at. So just from the false flags, yes. So Mario, for example, a perfect example of the kind of the things that we've historically seen that have been false flag operations was right before Russia invaded Ukraine. There was a lot of videos coming out of Ukraine launching, quote unquote, Ukraine launching attacks into Russia, crossing the international border. A lot of those videos that then they killed them and captured him and showed it, and blatantly obvious, this was a false flag. Those were false flags, and this was over a year ago. However, I think this one, if you talk, especially, I think OSINT Defender also tweeted about this, and I'll defer to Intel later. This does not appear to be one. I mean, the guy who did it is very public. He's part of the Russian volunteer corps that fights on behalf of Ukraine. Clear, he's well documented, neo-Nazi, far-right ideology, has been fighting on behalf of Ukraine against Russia. And, he's kind of one of those far fringe figures that really, although has very present in, let's say, Telegram, hasn't really done much. And it does look like that he legitimately crossed into the border and conducted this operation against Russia, right? Which then begs the question, I mean, how did he do it? Right? I mean, like, how does Russia, a country that is at war, allow, a certain amount, let's say dozens of Russian soldiers or that support Ukraine to attack their sovereign territory for a duration of time? I think Intel would back me up on this, and a lot of the accounts that track Ukraine, OSINT community, they do not believe this was a false flag operation. They do believe that this was an attack. The question then goes back to, okay, was this, the Ukrainian government support it? Was this more of a lone wolf? Kind of, he took this decision on his own. I think those are kind of unknowns, but I would not call this a false flag. And
Daniel, do you think that they could use this as an excuse to escalate the war, or is it just a small event and you should look too deep into it?
Yeah, I think it's in the small event category. I mean, it was a very small operation, and who knows if that was even the target. I don't know why they would, make this effort to go and kill some civilians. Maybe they were actually heading somewhere else, but got caught and then panicked and ended up shooting it out with some of these people. But the reality is, though, it's not a big issue. It's something that's been dealt with, and plus, all further augmenting against. A false flag issue on the Russian side. They don't gain anything from this. And at least so far, they're not talking about escalating, though there has been quite a number of people on the far right in Russia that are demanding some sort of retaliation against Ukraine for their, quote, terrorist activities. So we'll be interested to see what kind of retaliation is, because it will be hard for Putin to not do anything in response.
Daniel, you said it's been dealt with. How has it been dealt with?
Well, they drove at least what the Russian media reported was that they drove the assailants back on the other side of the border and then hit them with devastating field artillery. So apparently they drove them out and then, at least allegedly, shot them up. I don't have any independent confirmation of that, but that's how they claim that they pushed them out right away.
Thank you.
Yeah, so like All Source was saying, it looks like this incident wasn't a false flag. So the video, there's two of them. There's three different people. They're just holding the flag and they're standing in front of a building. That video was geolocated in the town of Bryansk, and these individuals are loosely affiliated with the TDF. And like All Source was saying, the question becomes, was this authorized? According to them, they say that they did get authorization by the Ukrainian government, and the Ukrainian government says this is an internal Russian issue and we have no involvement with it. And then the only thing that seems false flaggy about this is the response. So the FSB published a video claiming that they killed some insurgents and they had two vehicles, and the whole thing was just wacky. The FSB have a history of doing weird videos saying that they captured people. Like last year, they had the famous incident with the raid where they allege that they arrested a Ukrainian saboteur. And they're like, oh, look, see, he's the saboteur. Look at those 3 copies of The Sims.
Emergent?
I just want to say I think I'm mostly in agreement with All Souls and Intel, but I think I would just add maybe one of the criteria you can use to distinguish is what really is the incentive, which side had something to gain from perpetrating this, because it does fall in the category of pretty typical things that we see nation states doing during time of war, sabotage and whatnot. I'd be curious to see, I mean, one of the examples that I would point to would be the Kerch Bridge incident, where the Ukrainians basically, sabotaged one lane of the Kerch Bridge, and then subsequently.
Is that the bridge? Is that the bridge in Crimea?
Correct. And then basically subsequently claimed credit for it in a tweet. So I would be curious to see if they do that again here. But otherwise, yeah, I would just say look at the specifics, the specific intel of the parties involved. And again, if there's video evidence, I haven't looked at that yet, but I'd be curious to see what there is behind that. But I'm pretty much in agreement with the other panelists.
So I'll add another piece of news relating to the war as well. An explosion was heard in the suburbs of Kolomna, a city over 100 kilometers from Moscow. The explosion is suspected to have been caused by a drone, but there is no confirmation yet, as no fragments have been found. Law enforcement and emergency officers are investigating the incident, and witnesses reported hearing a loud whiz before the blast. Wasn't this blast also potentially linked to a Russian airplane, just the breaking the sound barrier? Has anyone looked into this? Troy, go ahead, also.
Yeah, well, sorry, I'll defer to Troy, but I think what we're starting to notice is attacks against Russia proper are becoming more reoccurring. And I think that this raid that we saw in Russia kind of ties into that. And I think from the Ukrainians' perspective, because it makes sense, right? Hey, you're hitting all our country. Hey, we can hit you back, right? We want to ensure that you understand that the longer this war drags out.
But didn't Russia say that if there's attacks on their territory, that will be reason to potentially escalate the war and use nuclear weapons?
They'd have to be getting their ass kicked.
What I've said could be.
That's the thing. And no, because this has been, so it's more reoccurring, but it's happened in the past, right? And they're not going to just launch nukes to launch nukes because they want to launch nukes. And I think this issue of escalation, right? I think Russia doesn't need a justification to escalate any further, or even more than they are right now. They don't need an excuse or a reasoning to do a second mobilization. Like the first mobilization happened because of military facts on the ground, not because of the Kharkiv counteroffensive, where Ukraine sees significant territory. The Russians realize we need more people. If not, we're going to lose this war. So I think what's going to dictate things on the ground is military facts. What I think the Ukrainians are doing is this is more psychological, more strategic, more propaganda. Militarily is not that significant. If anything, is insignificant, but it does provide the propaganda value for Ukrainians to tell the Russians, you're in this war too. The longer this drags out, the more your country is also going to be a threat, just like ourselves, and that's natural in war. But I think Troy can probably provide more on that.
Yeah, what I was going to say about when Mario was talking about the nuclear doctrine, that's if there's an incursion into Russian territory, and you have to be at the gates essentially. That's their fail-safe, and they say they're justified by defending their homeland. We've seen a couple of strikes over the border, from eastern Ukraine into Russia on infrastructure, and we don't know the order of battle. Between like All Sorts was saying, there might be an agreement or an understanding in place where Ukraine is saying we're not going to tolerate unfettered strikes on our territory. If you have depots and logistics on your side, it's fair game. And I think the U.S. I'm not exactly certain, but I believe they have at least given a tacit approval to, if it's not weapons we're supplying you with, if it's your weapons, we're not going to tell you what to do. It's your war. So although there is a restriction for our munitions going on offensive into Russia, there isn't. And on the terrorist incident or whatever that incursion was, it seems exactly like the kind of false flag Russia would do. They haven't, hesitated to do that in the past. Going all the way back to the Moscow apartment bombings when Putin came to power. But in this case, I think there's a third kind of scenario where this leader of the nationalists, he can go in, deniably, without asking permission. And then after the fact, be able to say, neener, you got owned by the Ukrainians and me. And, if you're familiar, just to give you a little bit of background, specifically on the forest where this border is porous, and it has been since World War II. The Germans and the Soviets were having the same problems trying to keep partisans from sabotaging their infrastructure and their equipment. So if you think about like the forests of the Korengal Valley, it's locals that know the area, and even with modern technology, it's very easy for them to stalk. And there are people with their own incentives in Russia on the far right to accelerate this war if it means staging attacks or provocations on their own, either to to force Russia's hand and be more aggressive, then they'll do it. So I think Ukraine is playing both sides. We really don't know what happened, but they're kind of on the one hand saying, this is this happened, but we didn't have anything to do with it, and someone's taking credit for it. So I think that's as much as we're going to know for now.
I want to go Ghost and David. Maybe Ghost, you can go first, just to kind of balance out the discussion. With Ukraine, Ukraine seems to, the audacity seems to be increasing and starting to, conduct attacks on within Russian territory. What's the strategy there? How far do you think they can go? Because one common theme we've had in the space is that how far can we push Russia before they use tactical nukes? Ghost?
Hey, Mario. Were you mentioning me? Sorry.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I just came in. I thought the other guys go first. No, I just.
I was gonna get David. I was gonna get David to speak, but I thought I'd bring you in just to kind of balance out the discussion because I know your stance.
Well, maybe it's good because I have some additional context regarding the situation in Bryansk, because I came over the profile, Twitter profile, which is not very active. They have been very active, but they haven't got many responses, but they also used the logo which was on the flag that the guys held in those videos, and basically they outline their whole plan. And as it seems to me, the plan was to occupy a certain territory, have their own basically checkpoints, and they even published some passwords that should be given to pass through basically. And then later on the 2nd March said, okay, these aren't viable anymore. So I think the plan was way more extensive than was put in reality. And that's.
Are we talking about the attack in the Bryansk region?
Exactly.
But that's just a small attack, wasn't it? How many men was it? Because they just killed 2 people and wounded a child. That's it. It just doesn't seem like them taking territory and putting out a border and requesting passports.
Yeah. But I mean, I can put the.
How many men was it?
I don't know.
How many men was it?
Officially, it's speculated from 50 to 70, but it's Russian information. It's in a way controlled.
Hold on. I didn't know it was that many, but 50 to 70 people, and the only damage they could cause was in killing 2 people. This sounds odd.
Well, I
that's
think
what we know of.
So just to clarify, what you're trying to say is it was a much larger operation that essentially failed, and so therefore it looks a lot more smaller. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because they claim themselves to be a military administration of Western regions. So basically, and they outline it here in Russian, that they wanted to basically liberate, in quotes, the territory. And that's what I think the plan was.
Joa, you put before we go to David, Joa, I saw you put your thumb down. Maybe quickly comment, just keep it brief, because I want to move on to the next news story. Yeah. And then we'll get David's thoughts as well.
This isn't the first time an explosion happened in that region. It happened in December as well. I really believe this is an area of interest because of the train yard there and the
how many how many known attacks by Ukraine on Russian territory, and I'm referring to Russian territory pre-2014, because I don't want to get into the whole discussion there, excluding the Crimea Bridge, how many attacks has there been by Ukraine within Russia? And then including the territory that Russia and Ukraine are disputing, and I'm referring to Crimea here, what attacks have we seen since the war began? And are they escalating?
That's a hard question for me to answer.
Also,
I refer to all
start with
sources.
Saki Airbase.
David. Yeah,
so just give you a little context there.
David,
yeah, in 2004, 2003, we had the Orange Revolution that actually brought a lot of democratic push towards Ukraine. The politicians, especially considering the 1994-1997 push towards Russian political systems, especially in the establishment of Ukraine. And this was a fear factor and multiply was stated by Putin as to potential contagions of democratic pushes towards Russia and why he necessarily needs to ensure the stabilities within these regions. But in this whole evolution, we also have the Euro-Maidan revolution in 2013, 2014 that had this intense push. And essentially, if we're going into the Kharkiv agreement, and this is where the precedence comes into Putin's war, there was a Svastopol had a 2000 till 2042 a Russian military bank that was going to be enabled there, and Krasnodar is one of the most popular and or business center of Russia in that sense. So in this reality, these are the formal tensions that we're seeing within Russian statements and specifically Putin's articles as to the defense of this region. And if we go back all the way to September 29th, 2003, the island of Tuzla, so this peninsula between Sevastopol in the Black Sea and Krasnodar was this actual interaction, and we've been seeing consistent military activity within this region. And so to answer your question, Mario, yes, we've been continuously seeing activity in this particular region due to the Black Sea and how the supply chain towards Russian dominance is necessarily present there.
So Mario, what I would say is that to your question specifically of like how regular, so there's artillery shelling across Russia through the border like daily. That is a normal, regular occurrence. Russia-Ukrainian artillery across the borders, the international borders, like 1991 borders, are very regular and constant. What we've seen an escalation in, or not maybe an escalation, I'm going to rephrase it, what we've seen more and more and more, because we started to see late last year, more drone strikes against Crimea, and that's kind of been also fairly consistent. What we're seeing lately more, and has been a little bit more consistent, is these reports from Russia of drones. Because in the past, what we saw is, a Hind. We saw this famous Hind against a Volgograd oil refinery that would go in. So a Hind is a helicopter, Ukrainian helicopter goes and strikes it. Then a couple of weeks later, we might get reports of something else. Maybe a couple of months later. Lately, at least for maybe the last week or 2 weeks, there's been more and more and more, at least reporting of drone strikes into Russia, especially this week specifically. Is this just an uptick because it's, we're kind of outside of the anniversary of Russia's invasion to Ukraine, so there's that symbology, or is this now a new standard that Ukraine is going to do? I think this raid, you can also tie into it, but we just don't know if we have to wait a little bit to see if this is going to be standard. Or is it
listen. But also, look what concerns me. I'm just going to read out the next piece here. Viktor Sobolev, a member of the State Duma Defense Committee, said the following, and he's not the only one. Said that Russia absolutely, that's quote, absolutely needs to end the quote special operation and start the real war. I'll read out the exact quote. There are no red lines left regarding Ukraine, and we need to end the special operation and start a war. So what concerns me, and it came out today on War Monitor, what concerns me is that these incursions by Ukraine, from the news might give a boost to the troops, but beyond that, doesn't really help the war much.
So Mario, just to add to your point. So
yeah, go ahead.
The reason for that statement, and it's important, is because from the other side, and just to add to Ghost's point, the feeling amongst Russia is, and they believe they've got the evidence, that this wasn't an incursion, but this was an attack funded by the US and was basically commanded by Kiev. And so therefore, what the feeling amongst
Why? But the question is, why would they do this? It's just the risk outweigh the reward massively.
Well, this is it, because this is the reason why Sobolev's making that point, because he feels, and maybe some within Russia feel, that Putin's acting a bit too lightly in the war, in the sense of, because he said in the past, isn't it, these are Slavic people, so and so he has that kind of thought process. And so what Sobolev's basically saying is, look, it's time to actually stop this special operation and actually go to war. So anyway, let's hear other people's thoughts on this.
Yeah. So the only thing I would say, Mario, the only thing I would say is, the only thing I would say quickly is, because I want to go to the speakers, is do not put too much value in what Russian media, Russian politicians say. At the end of the day, their voice doesn't matter. It's Putin. Putin is the ultimate authority in this, and maybe you can go a little bit down in his chain of command, but not much. You always see Russia media, Russia politicians. They've been beating this drum of. They said it the same after the sinking of the Moskva, right? Like I would not put too much emphasis in whatever Russia. This is a special military operation in name only. Like, it's a war for everybody else. I don't know why they continue to call it a special military operation, but if you look at Russia's laws and how they transition their economy and how they operate with the mass mobilization, they are in a war footing already. There's not much else they can do. Maybe a second mobilization, but that's going to have a lot of issues anyways.
And Emergent, what do you think, man? I don't know. I feel like if Putin is facing pressure from who with the war, surprisingly though, I read somewhere that despite conscription, Russians are starting to rally more in support of the war instead of going further against the war. And I think that's the nationalism kicking in. Am I right in saying this, Emergent and Daniel?
The sources I've been following, I'd say that's generally true. I wanted to weigh in here with, I wonder if, assuming a Ukraine responsibility, I wonder if the motive could be along the lines of putting Russia on a footing of maybe being more defensive in their thinking, or having to occupy time, resources, attention, worrying about more attacks of this kind, maybe more of a psychological objective than an infrastructure objective. That would fit, and that would make sense as an incentive for them to do it. But again,
just based on what you said, I've got a question. So do you think that then failed because apparently if you look at the number of people who were impacted, it was minimal. So do you think even if that was their objective, they failed?
If so, then yes, I would say they did. And if it ultimately rallies Russians to support it, then yes. So it could be that type of operation. And if so, probably ill-conceived and or unsuccessful.
Daniel?
To answer your question there, I think that part of the issue with the move, certainly a lot more than just this one politician have been saying, let's just forget about this special military operation, go with a declaration of war, because there has been a growing sense of anger and frustration among many in the Russian population and leadership, because they see this as an increasingly NATO against Russia war. And that Ukraine is just being used as a baseball bat against them, and it's not really anymore just them against Russia. And and when we talk about we're now going to give all these Challenger 2 tanks, Leopard 2 tanks, M1A2 tanks, all these things are coming later on. There's lots of talk about should we start sending F-16s or Mirage 2000s. All those things continue to make Russia say we should not just hold back and just try to get the Donbass. We should just do whatever we need to do to get our security. And so a lot of the talk is in that and that's why people are saying this more out loud. And I agree with the other speaker there a second ago that what matters is what Putin's going to do. And he's been very, pretty clear from the beginning. He's going to use exactly as much force as he thinks he needs and not going to go beyond that for reasons, known up to him. But I think it's important to understand that this is a growing issue in Russia, as they genuinely do feel. It's not just that it's a media selling a story to the people, but they actually believe, and they see a lot of tangible evidence that this is NATO against Russia, and they have something close to an existential fight that needs to be won.
And to elude that point, Sorry about that, Mario. But to elude that point, back in these Kharkov pacts, essentially we had this agreement with these non-Crimean states. This was a Sevastopol within this idea that NATO won't interact within this country until the formal lease is resolved within Russia, and the lease was extended from 2017 to 2042. Now we're seeing articles and more precedents out of NATO saying it must end its current stranglehold within the Black Sea and Russian dominance in this association. But if we're looking at the historical legal documentations that's represented is within these agreements and within the rhetoric that Putin is demonstrating, hence why we're seeing this potential conflict within, let's say, internal policies within Russia and Putin's action, is because legally speaking, he's continuously in accordance within the actual agreements that he's in place since 2003 all the way on to 2017.
A question, very brief question, if you can keep it very brief, because I want to move to China's involvement in this. Schizo or Intel Schizo or Emergent, is Putin facing resistance within? I know that we don't have much clarity on what's happening in the Kremlin, but is he facing much resistance from his inner circle? Because I know he was facing a fair bit of resistance in the early days of the war, and some left Russia, some apparently died from mysterious circumstances. But are we seeing that same amount of resistance, or are people within his administration also rallying around the war and around Putin, considering the perception of NATO's stranglehold on Russia?
There's been a little bit, I would say, a little bit of pushback. Not much. The big thing that's been happening recently has been internal power struggle between Prigozhin and Shoigu and some of the other.
Who are these guys briefly?
Prigozhin's the head of NATO, or not NATO, sorry, Wagner. Yeah, he's the head of NATO. He got a promotion. Prigozhin's the head of Wagner. He's very public about his thoughts. He regularly critiques decisions made by the Russian high command. He's regularly critiquing Putin. And there's been a little bit of a power struggle over the past few weeks between him and the generals. There's been a bunch of decrees reducing weaponry and equipment to Wagner. They stopped doing the bringing in new prisoners into Wagner. They've been trying to reduce Prigozhin's sway. They recently told Russian media outlets there was a new decree that came out saying that pretty much if you're talking about updates in the war, you can't talk about Prigozhin. So if Bakhmut falls tomorrow, and let's say Wagner's makes a video showing that they drove the Ukrainians out, Russian media isn't supposed to even mention anything that Wagner does, and not supposed to mention anything that Prigozhin says.
I want to go to China's involvement, Slayman, because that one's interesting. Because on one side, I'll let you read it out, but on one side, they're trying to broker peace. On the other side, Russia apparently has concerns of China supplying weapons to Russia. So what's the latest today?
Well, with China, the interesting thing is they've basically framed themselves as bastions of peace and prosperity in the region. So the Chinese Foreign Minister Jin Gang said in his speech that what China want is to maintain peace and prosperity with Russia. In addition to that, in regards to the Russian crisis, they support all efforts for peace and will continue to do so in a very constructive role.
When you say the Russian crisis, what do you mean? You're referring to the war or the economic crisis?
The Russian-Ukraine crisis, they're referring to the war. And then regarding continuing on with the Ukraine crisis, so that again, the Russian-Ukraine war, China is saying that they oppose all double standards and any pressure for sanctions, and that they will continue to continue to exchange with Russia on all levels. So they're basically saying they want peace. Any statements about sanctions are double standards, and they will continue to work with Russia at all levels.
And what's interesting is that they did say a few days ago that they respect the territorial integrity of all countries. Obviously, in this case, it is seen as a a way to support Ukraine's position, but at the same time they keep pushing back against, and they also show understanding of Russia's position and NATO's expansion. They've talked about this on a regular basis. But like, are they genuinely trying to broker peace, all sorts, or is it just trying to show them, trying to increase their, or try, more of a PR campaign, PR stunt?
I think for now I would call it a little bit more of a PR, or like, and I think this is a way that they can quote unquote try to pivot from the balloon issue, right, and try to reassert themselves internationally to show a soft side. But I think it's a little bit more PR. Where I would give more credibility to China is if we start seeing not only Chinese officials meeting with Russia, which is more recurrent, but specifically with Ukrainian officials. You start seeing. But
they did that, no?
No.
There's there's discussions of it. Discussions of
yes. So if we start seeing, let's say, members of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, senior officials of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs start heading over to China, maybe in their foreign advisor. If we start seeing many in the outskirts of like the UN, we start seeing Chinese Ukrainian ambassadors having conversations, then I would have landed a little bit more credence and believability. But we just haven't seen any significant push from the Chinese on the international stage yet to do this. And honestly, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Ukraine and Russia have no desire right now for peace treaty. They both think they can fight this war. We're going to have to wait until probably the end of the war to see anything.
I was on the impression they both want peace, but they want it under their own terms. Daniel, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with all sorts? Yeah. Is that a PR campaign by China?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of a couple of things. One is it's definitely a PR campaign by China because they want to position themselves as the quote adult in the room and the side that's actually looking for peace, not just trying to expand the war. And they're saying a lot of the things that many countries in the world actually believe. They're like, look, just make sure that this doesn't expand, make sure that there's nuclear safety is assured. And then that the economies are open back up and the grain shipments begin, those kinds of things that resonates with them, as opposed to, some of the stuff that the United States is saying, which is, just will provide weapons as long as it takes. And that doesn't even address a possible ending, which most of the world just wants to see the thing end. But it's also interesting that Zelensky said just a few days ago that he wants to meet with Xi. So I don't think that he's just rejecting it out of hand. And that could be because he's starting to recognize that maybe his position on the battlefield is not quite so strong as he thought. And these ideas that they're going to push Russia all the way back to the 1991 borders is just fantasy. There's just no prospect for that. And at some point, they're going to have to make some kind of a negotiated settlement. And maybe he thinks that he can get in on Xi and so it's not too much on the Russian side. That's probably what he's doing.
Joa, jump in. And Joa and she interrupted. Joa and the Ghost.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of
Joe, by the way, Joe, I just want to add one thing. Like, I feel I feel naive because I thought China's serious about this. China does want peace. They want their economic relation with Russia. They want Russia's economy to improve. They might benefit from the Ukraine war. There are benefits as well. US is distracted by Ukraine. They want to see how it plays out because obviously they have their own ambitions with China. So, I think both arguments make sense, but every country wants their economy to do well. And economies generally don't do too well when there's war. Actually, no, I'll take that back. A lot of economies do extremely well. And in this case, China's supply to Russia just improved because of the sanctions by NATO. So I don't know, maybe the argument of China doing this just for the PR could be valid.
Well, I don't think it's just for the PR. I think they do want peace. But I kind of view China, Russia, kind of the same way I viewed America and Saudi Arabia, right? They were armed lock and step, the largest consumer of petroleum and the largest producer of petroleum. Now you have China, the largest consumer of liquid natural gas, and Russia, the largest producer of liquid natural gas. And I've worked for a lot of energy companies. Liquid natural gas is well known to be what's going to be the transition energy away from petroleum. We can't put everyone on solar or on wind right away. There has to be a transition energy, and that's liquid natural gas. And that's where you'll see a lot of electric companies are investing more in exploration of liquid natural gas because to transition, we will need it. So I kind of view them the same way Saudi Arabia and America. America would make statements in favor of Saudi Arabia, even if Saudi Arabia and vice versa. Here, a call came in. America would make announcements in favor of Saudi Arabia, defending them even when they're wrong, and vice versa. I think the same thing is happening here. China does want peace, but they want it the way Russia wants it, right? So Russia considers those territories to be Russian. That's the border they want to respect. They don't identify whether they think Crimea belongs to Ukraine or doesn't. They say they want the borders respected, and they're an ally of Russia, and they need to be.
I want to go quickly to Emergent and Ghost. Guys, do you think China will supply weapons to Russia? Because that is a line I never thought would ever be crossed.
I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I think for right now, it kind of goes back to the first balloon incident. It's plausible that China did that mostly as a provocative stunt. And to me, then making this statement in support of Russia, to me right now, it looks like it's posturing, and even just them posturing, saying they're making a vague statement about supporting Russia may have an effect just on, I mean, it's even changing the discussion around it. So I think for now it's just posturing, but I'm sure if they're posturing, then they probably have a mapped out decision tree of, well, you know, under these circumstances, we might escalate to advisory support. On these circumstances, might escalate to that. I would imagine anything in terms of direct military support or material weapons aid would be farther down that decision tree. Probably not something they're going to do right away.
Can I ask your opinion? If what about them providing money? If the question was about money, if they would provide money, not just weapons, would your answer change?
Sure. If I would imagine they'd provide advisory support and or financial support, you know, probably economic support in terms of trade. I'd probably see those things occur long before weapons. But yes, if we were further down that, then I'd say more likely.
Ghost, do you agree with that?
Yeah, Ghost, if you can answer that question. And in addition to that, if you can also tell us, because Blinken said that the US may sanction China if it gives weapons or ammunition to Russia. So if you answer that question, and then in addition to that, answer this secondary question, that'd be brilliant. Ghost, if you want to unmute.
Oh, sorry. I didn't really listen to the question, but in terms of weapon support, I think it's more of a posturing position. I would agree with that, because if they really wanted to provide weaponry and there would be no problem to do it covertly over a third country, or just bring it over the border and not do it officially, basically. So I think they just use it as a way to point out hypocrisy, because Europe and America is basically supplying nonstop weaponry. And I think it also builds on the one point that Putin made in a recent, I don't think it was a speech, but he mentioned it recently, that because Western countries aren't getting paid for those weapons, I mean, the US is basically working with a lend-lease, but I think European countries are just donating them. He said those countries that are basically donating those weapons aren't getting paid for them, so it's not a normal arms deal, and they can be considered as basically parties to the conflict. And I think it's somehow also building on that point. So I would agree with the position that it's posturing right now, because just I also don't see the need for weapons. What Russian army needs is drones that the Russian army lacks of. But I think at the point right now, the hole has been stuffed. Yeah, I think the weaponry, we got the most tanks in the world.
Well, there
I want to go to Daniel. Yes, Schizo, I want to go to you as well on this one. Daniel, and then Schizo. Blinken saying that they will sanction China if they do supply Russia with weapons. Economically, that sounds really concerning. Could we see China supply weapons to Russia? Will the US sanction China? And how could all this look like? Like, it just seems like it keeps escalating.
That's a lot more difficult than sanctioning Russia because our economy is so.
I think it's going to look. If I may jump in, I think it's going to look a lot like.
Hold on, Troy. I'll give you the mic in a bit.
Sorry,
Schizo. Go ahead, Daniel. Oh, good. Go ahead, Daniel.
Because the U.S. economy and China's economy are so deeply intertwined that you start throwing sanctions on them and you start having serious impacts on American businesses. And then, of course, on American consumers, and that stuff can have rebound effects that are not very appealing to voters in the United States. And so, I think that they had to be much more careful about doing that. And of course, that has double-edged sword there for China as well. So, I think that it would be a big issue for them to do that, at least openly. But look, they have some motivation to want to help Russia, especially if it keeps us tied down, if it keeps costing us things and works against our interests. They have a motivation to try to move in that direction, but they want to, like they have done so many times in so many different areas, they want to walk that fine line towards pushing, but not too far, so that it spawns these kinds of things. But I think it is possible. But the circumstances would have to change a lot. Namely, that maybe Russia would be in a threat militarily of maybe not winning or something. Like if enough weapons came in from the West, potentially they would do that to save Russia if they thought they were losing. But right now they're not. Russia's not suffered like that. In fact, with the likely fall of Bakhmut within the next day or two, they're continuing to, however slowly, move to the west. And unless that changes, China has no need to do that and take that kind of risk.
Daniel,
do you agree?
Sorry, Daniel, just based on what you said, sorry, Mario, just based on what you said, because you said that one of the things that will stop the US from engaging in sanctions is the fact that the negative impact it'll have on the American people. But then they've not considered that when it comes to the Ukraine and Russia war, where working class Americans are struggling significantly. So is it the case that it's much worse? Is that why? Or
yeah. Because what the problems and the rebound effects we've been suffering from the Russian sanctions are a lot more opaque and not direct. But because there's in our total trade with Russia was comparatively quite small in relation to how big it is with with China. So the impact would be a lot more direct. And I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, can I quickly jump in? What about Europe? Could because I think if sanctions will be discussed, that Europe might be pushed towards sanctions first. How would that impact Europe?
Sanctioning China, I would be surprised if Europe doesn't sanction China, because Europe is. They want the war to end just as much as the US, and I don't think they're supplying weaponry to Ukraine as well. So I'm not sure what you think, Daniel, on that question, but would Europe participate in the sanctions on China?
I mean, just looking at the history, they probably would, because we would try to coerce them. We don't want to do it by ourselves. And, China has been courting Europe, to get more business, and, just in the last few days, in fact. And so they don't want that to happen, and they want to give Europe every incentive not to want to put sanctions on there. So that would be a pressure. And I doubt that Europe would want to put sanctions on China, because they want to do business as well. And I think they hope it doesn't come to that, I would bet.
Schizo, what are your thoughts on this before we move on to the next story?
Yeah, so one of this kind of flew under the radar till earlier this week, but the sanctions package that was announced on January 23rd, one of the entities that was listed on that sanctions list was a company called Space T. That's the English name. It's a Chinese satellite company. And this company, according to the Department of the Treasury, the reason they put it on the sanctions list was for providing, along with its subsidiary Space T Luxembourg, was for providing SAR imagery to Wagner, and apparently has been routinely been requested by Wagner to get satellite imagery of Ukraine and then using that in their combat operations. And in this sanctions package by the Treasury on the 23rd, they specifically called out this company, which has ties to the Chinese Academy of the Sciences, which is
you got a bit of background, Schizo. You got some background noise, man. I'm not sure.
Yeah, collecting sap for maple syrup. this company is linked with the Chinese Academy of the Sciences, which is the same company agency that does the balloon research and is affiliated with the Chinese Army.
All right, man. I'm gonna go to the next story if you don't mind, Slayman. We've got so we're gonna move away from Ukraine here.
Mario, do you mind if I ask just one question to Daniel, considering his statements? It's just related to, I was just curious what sanctions would impact based off of our unreflexive and unsophisticated foreign policy currently established within, let's say, economic sanctions on Russia. And then equally, like when we're looking at the arms trade that was established in '92 by China, we know that they've been formally supplying, let's say, Iran, Sudan, Myanmar, Nepal, and all of these other formerly, let's say, conflicting governments, right? And essentially the US has been noting this as a problem for a long time.
And before you answer that, Daniel, David, I want to ask you a question after Daniel. What will happen to the US and Western economies or to the world economy if the US does end up sanctioning China, and how would that look like? Because that's what worries me. I did a tweet about it a few days ago. But Daniel, I'd love you to answer David's question first.
I mean, I'm honestly not sure what kind of sanctions they would attempt to put on there. I'm just generally speaking a big opponent of our sanctions policy, because we throw sanctions around left and right with no idea what they're supposed to accomplish. We want to do it for punishment, but the whole point of using sanctions is supposed to influence the behavior of another side so that their power really is in their lifting, that if you do the things we want here, we'll lift you. But we never do that part. So it's just an easy, really reflexive, non-thinking tool that I think rarely works to our benefit. And so I've not heard any specific targets that might be applied here. But especially if you're talking about weapons.
But Daniel, do they even work anymore? Like we saw the sanctions in Russia did not have the impact that people expected. Europe wasn't impacted as much as people expected.
No, that's why that like the sanctions and the threat of these unprecedented sanctions is going to stop Russia from invading. Of course, it didn't have any impact because they're going to operate in their national interest. It had no impact, has had no impact in Iran for what, decades probably. And a lot of these sanctions we've had on China already during this trade war, and about going back to the Trump administration and others now, they don't have any impact. That's the. I wouldn't say.
Would you agree that it has little, not as much impact as the US would like? Not no impact at all, because the US is in, the US economy is contracting.
Well, let me
there's long-term effect.
Let me rephrase that. Not that there's no impact, but that there's no positive result. It doesn't accomplish what you want it to. It does have an impact, and that's the negative part of it that I don't like, because it ends up like this stuff. A lot of this stuff, both with Europe and the United States against Russia, all these sanctions we've had over the last year have probably hurt our side more than the Russian side.
And that's exactly it. And when we're looking at historical precedents, and I'll keep it really synthesized in that sense, historically, sanctions have had the reverse impact economically speaking, especially when we're bringing in Iran and this current situation within Russia. It brought in capital controls, and already 70% of their economic supply chain had been reduced and externalized outside of European and or sanction imposed type countries. And this is where it becomes conflicting, because if we go into sanctioning the Chinese supply chain, one, as Daniel has alluded to, it's going to dramatically impact our abilities to export our, let's say, tasks and or real economic needs within, let's say, mineral needs and or other forms of development needs. So let's say Apple and Tesla will no longer be able to produce as easily as they are. And then, long story short, they're already alluding to closing their economies within 2016 rhetoric, within military arguments in Chinese ideas. And so by this, it would just expedite their external closing of their economy, because they allude to the Japanese closing of their economies back in the 18th century. And they want to build their economies to sustain this level of exclusion within worldwide economy. And this is just me paraphrasing specific wording that Xi is now using. And so it would expedite this type of maneuver, and we would just see increased geopolitical tensions and economic tensions.
Thanks for that, David. Just so changing direction slightly, Biden has said that he's finally going to visit East Palestine, but hasn't said when. But this is a question to you, Aaron. Is it too little, too late, or is it? And does this look bad for optics, or is it fine? And he's sent other people in before, and now he is going in himself. What do you think?
Yeah, Aaron, I want to add on to the question as well, Aaron. First, can you hear us? Aaron, you near your mic?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah,
are
what are
me
your
or
thoughts?
Another Aaron?
Yeah, no, to you, Aaron, to you, Ben.
Cool.
A long time.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. So regarding Biden visiting East Palestine,
yeah.
What I just don't understand, why is it so important that he visits it? Okay, we can attack him for not visiting it, but like that doesn't change anything on the ground. I think other things are needed for the cleanup there, rather than just Biden visiting East Palestine. I think when people were criticizing him for that, he was in Ukraine, which obviously symbolically had a lot more impact.
I agree. I think him visiting now would be too little, too late. When a visible, known leader shows up at a site of a disaster like that, on the one hand, it can actually get in the way of certain response efforts, but also there are people in that situation that need to know that those in authority recognize what's going on here, see that it's important, care about us enough to show up, get on the ground with their boots and take a look at what's going on. But I think that needed to happen really right away. And if Biden's in Ukraine, he needs to deputize someone who's a well-known public figure, whether the vice president or the secretary of one of the major departments. Transportation, would have been a reasonable one. But Mayor Pete, I think, it took a little too long as well to show up. And already there were others on the ground trying to get efforts going. And so it's not about needing to have a political leader there to get things done, but it's about needing to have a political leader there because it conveys a message to the people of that town that you matter to us. You may not have voted for me for president, but I'm the president for you because I'm the president of the United States, not just people in red states or blue states or red counties or blue counties. And I'm here for anyone who needs help at the federal level. And this was a disaster that did require help at the federal level in terms of assessing, the nature of the problem, protecting people from harm to the extent possible, bringing in the resources to do the cleanup and make sure that the environment there gets back to a healthy state as quickly as possible. So I'm on the one hand, I suppose I'm glad that the president is paying attention to that town now. But I think in terms of what would have been helpful to the people of that town, the opportunity had probably already passed. And at this point, it's probably best to let the ongoing efforts just run at their own pace. Yeah, and there's, just for the audience, we're going to do a new space on East Palestine. Nick, who's still there, the stuff that he's found, I don't know what he's going to allow me to disclose now and not disclose yet. But the things he did, the information he got, that's not public. Nobody knows. The discussions he's heard, the things he's seen, he hasn't shared yet. It is insane. It just shows first how far. It's like Nick is creating his own version of Project Veritas there, and the impact, the amount of damage that was done is significantly more than what's being reported, at least based on Nick's report. So this is something we're going to be covering later in a space that we're preparing for. Before we continue with the next story, I do want to go back to another story that's linked to the Ukraine war, and that's regarding sanctions. Daniel was talking about sanctions earlier, and I'm going to read this out. 2 U.S. nationals were arrested in Kansas for sending U.S. aviation technology to Russia. And that was by Matthew from the U.S. Commerce Department. And that's fascinating because it reminds me of the movie War Dogs. And I was meeting someone and they were telling us how, that was a while ago, and how they supply. So I'll tell you this interesting story. Airplanes, so aircrafts cannot be, there's very strict controls on supplying aircraft, who you supply them to, and there's a lot of KYC that needs to be done, know your customer. And then he's telling me how there's some people trying to sell aircraft to, and not only aircraft, various equipment and stuff to Russian nationals through various corridors. And one thing I've learned is that whenever there is sanctions, for entrepreneurs, for investors, that for them, they see it as a business opportunity, finding legal means to supply the demand that is not being met because of sanctions. Now, we saw the story of these 2 Americans. So they've been arrested in Kansas for supplying aviation technology to Russia.
and they're gonna be charged with several offenses, including conspiracy, exporting controlled goods without a license, falsifying and failing to file export information, and smuggling goods contrary to U.S. law. So they've done it illegally. There's a lot of people that find loopholes whenever there's sanctions through legal means. So anyone that gives me more clarity on this, I'm fascinated by it. And another thing as well that I've been learning about is how vulnerable the US is to technology theft. We've seen a lot of US IP get sent to China, illegally sent to China. And we've seen as well US microchips in Russian weapons that is being used in the Ukraine war right now. So it's a fascinating web of sanctions and different supply chains. And it kind of goes to Daniel's point that sanctions don't have the impact, and emergent, I'm just going to bring you back up, don't have the impact that the US would like whenever they implement them. Not sure if emergent or protocol or anyone else, since Daniel just dropped out, has more clarity on sanctions and why they're not having the impact that the US would like them to have.
Yeah, because they are adept at evading them, right? You're seeing blending in North Africa, India. You've seen arbitrage. Go look at India's oil exports. Look at China's. They're still buying Russian oil. They're just having to wait a couple more steps and have it travel through different means to get there. I mean, that's what's going on.
Yeah, currently 70% since 2019 of the oil markets and LNG pipelines from, let's say, Russia have already been mitigated and attempted to, let's say, externalize their dependency on European needs. And then from there, when we're looking at the whitewashing of oil or Russian oil going into European countries, it's actually extraordinary. And this explains, in fact, the actual price differences and the differences in, let's say, different distilled values and premium values between, let's say, diesel, gas, and other forms of distilled products. And I think that it's an interesting situation when we're looking at the supply chain.
Yeah, I pinned some stories up there, Mario, if you want. They touch upon, operations running out of North Africa, running out of Spain, etc. I mean, you're having a lot of countries since the war started. All of a sudden, they're net exporters of a lot of Russian commodities.
I'll go to
Malawi to be specific.
What to be specific, Joa? What did you say, Joa? Joa, you're muted. Can you hear me, anyone?
Yeah, Malawi's. Malawi.
What about it?
They're becoming a huge player in North Africa, trafficking the energy from Russia.
Malawi, really?
Yeah. Which is strange.
Is the African economy benefiting from all these sanctions? They would be, no?
No, because they're having to compete for their commodities with.
Oh no! Yes, so Africa wouldn't benefit. Sorry, Africa wouldn't benefit because now there's too much commodities in the market.
Like South Africa is having rolling blackouts.
So the countries that are demanding. So So I'll rephrase it. So Africa wouldn't benefit, but countries that are that need those resources and that are not part of NATO, of course, they would be benefit. India would benefit heavily, no? They need it for their economy.
Non-aligned countries. India is benefiting. You're seeing North Africa pockets. Yeah, they can benefit. I mean, listen, basically, Yellen told India, and I can pin the story up there. She said, listen, you can buy as much Russian energy as you want. Just don't use U.S. dollars and don't use Western insurance. And they've moved the trade at a dollar-denominated trade, and they.
But why? Hold on. Why is Yellen okay with this?
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, that's why I look at our foreign policy. I'll put it up there. But yeah, I have no idea.
So that's public. That was it's public information. It's a fact. Yeah. It's not like someone heard Yellen say this behind the scenes.
Oh no, she said it outright. Yeah, it's a fact. Yeah.
Okay, that's unexpected. I'll go to the next story. I'm moving away from completely moving away from Ukraine. There's an earthquake in this is not worth talking about in Vanuatu, but not worth talking about because I don't think there's many deaths there. But since Turkey, whenever there's an earthquake, people are discussing it. There's a lot of damage, so our thoughts are with people in Vanuatu. I want to talk about, before Elon Musk, I want to talk about Section 702 by Biden. Sleiman, can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, I think it's major news, and it's kind of been not talked about enough. But basically, Biden wants to extend the full electronic surveillance And it says of foreigners outside the United States. What we know is, from reputable journalists such as Glenn Greenwald, this surveillance has been used against Americans. And so it's been, tracking their calls and so on and so forth. So the fact that this is being extended is, again, another example of Americans being surveilled and also losing their freedom and liberty. So that's the story. So I guess let's talk about some thoughts about it. So
what are the So can anyone? I want to play devil's advocate first, or not devil's advocate, because it's a good argument. So not sure if also Aaron could give us some of the why is such surveillance needed? What are the benefits? Of what many of us consider an infringement on our freedom.
Maybe first, Mario, if you don't mind, I would just like to give a couple more examples to set context for the story of what surveillance is happening, and then we could have the debate about whether it's good or bad and where and how it should be used, because I think there's a lot of folks that don't understand the degree to which they are being surveilled at a pretty micro level, even in cases where they think they may be opting out of that. So just going back to the last 3 years, the surveillance ramped up quite a bit during the pandemic. So we saw out of Israel passed emergency legislation allowing the Shin Bet, which is basically their version of the FBI, to extract, track, and trace data from cell phones during the Omicron variant wave to basically monitor COVID contacts, and that they were going to do that for the entire population, whether people wanted to opt in or not. Now, they at least did that publicly. It was passed legislatively, from elected officials who could be voted out of office. We found out a few months after that Canada had been doing the same thing, but without notifying, informing, or gaining consent from the population, even though Justin Trudeau earlier in the pandemic had promised the Canadian people they wouldn't do that. And then in May of last year, Vice broke the story that the CDC was doing the same thing. They were extracting track and trace data from cell phones to monitor during lockdowns and school closures how many people were gathering at a school, how many people were gathering at a church. Now, that data was supposedly anonymized, but there were some researchers from Princeton that showed pretty clearly that with only 4 data points, you could identify the specific individual to the anonymized number used in that data set. So the data wasn't really anonymized, or at least it wasn't secure in that regard. And the CDC also admitted, as did the Canadian Public Health Agency, that they were going to continue this program even after the pandemic. They were going to apply it for other public health purposes. And the examples they gave, it was a pretty expansive notion of public health, and what public health agencies should be responsible for. So that's an example of not even the intelligence agencies at work, although they probably had a hand in coordinating this, but in this case, public health agencies utilizing this kind of mass surveillance technology without going through the usual democratic process of publicly passing a law or having a public debate about the pros and cons of surveillance and when and how it should be used. So I just want to add that to the latest story about Biden's executive order, because I think there's a lot of folks that don't understand the degree to which this has now become normalized across sort of multiple domains of the federal government.
Thank you for that, Aaron. Yeah, I think that's eloquently put. And just to add to what Aaron said, that surveillance that he's given an example of happening since COVID, when it comes to the United States, it has been happening since 2005. So, for example, when Bush and Cheney authorized the NSA to spy on the international calls of Americans without a warrant, and then what they did was retroactively try and backdate that law to basically allow or legalize the spying that was happening. So this is very big. It's very huge, and it adds to this kind of like big brother society that we're in. So all sorts. What do you think?
I mean, it's much worse than that. I mean, the whole act needs to go. I mean, these are secret courts where you don't even get to defend yourself, and they get warrants out on the person. And this was weaponized. against a candidate for a major presidential party and the president of the United States. The FISA warrants, false evidence was given to the courts. They approved multiple warrants based on a lie, based on altered emails, based on exclusion of evidence in regards to a political party and foreign intelligence operatives in the Russiagate hoax. This is what the court was using. It divided the entire United States, and that's because it was allowed to be done in secrecy. And this is a big problem in regards to also, warrantless collection of American data. If how loosely they define terrorists now, anybody who's in the center, you've joined us now on the right, you're basically a domestic terrorist. I mean, this is going to be weaponized against you. It already has. They don't even have the authority, and they've done it.
Yeah, just for our audience too, if you're not aware of FISA or the FISA courts, so FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Service Act, and basically what happened was the intelligence agencies said, if we need a warrant to basically spy on someone or gain access to otherwise secured data in order to track or monitor someone's movements or whatever, we don't want to go through the regular courts because then our cover will be blown. And so the federal government created these literally secret courts. I believe it's a federal judge. It may even be a Supreme Court judge that oversees the whole FISA court system. But in practice, they become a kind of rubber stamp operation. First of all, because they're not public, there's no oversight or scrutiny. And the other thing that happens is the intelligence agencies basically hold it over the judge's head that if you don't allow us to do this, and some building gets blown up, that blood is going to be on your head. So it's always, if you want arguments in favor of surveillance, they always sort of move along.
But the regular system works, right? The regular system is good enough. Even when you look at the Department of Homeland Security, before it was created, both the FBI, CIA, and other intelligence agencies had information regarding the plot of the terrorists. The problem is there was no cross-channel communication between the agencies, and they were allowed to basically slip through the cracks. You just have to enforce the laws on the books or curtail them. But the invention of these new apparatuses that have never existed before and take into account no constitutional safeguards or no American jurisprudence. I mean, I think we need less black sites in the former Yugoslavia and on floating.
I've got a question for you and Aaron on this point, and then I want to get all sorts of thoughts. What can they? I was asking my team, what can they access? Like, how on my phone right now? What would they have access to if I was in the US?
So
everything, emails, your entire phone, any contacts.
Let's break it down one by one. Yeah, I'm really curious. This is fascinating.
They can have access, obviously, to your location, to the people that are around you, like within.
Even if Aaron, just on the location, I want to go a bit deep and granular. So location, if I turn off my location on my phone, could they still access my location?
Yes, absolutely. Your phone is still extracting and tracking data even when it's fully turned off. I have a friend who basically, had an expert hack his iPhone and make it unsurveillable, at least insofar as that can be done. And basically, what he said after that is the battery on my iPhone, and he's a busy CEO. He said the battery on my iPhone now lasts about 7 or 8 days with continuous busy use. Most of the drain on the battery, most of the energy that the phone is consuming, it's using when you're not even using the phone, right? You notice your battery kind of drains even when you're not using the phone if you don't plug it in for a few days. The phone is very active, and it's very active even when you fully power it down. And so, yes, they can extract location data. They could turn on your microphone even if your phone is turned off.
Sorry. All right, let's go. This crazy shit you're saying. So I want to understand.
Yeah, Mario, your finish the location. Horrible. They got you a while ago. They got everything.
Okay, so it was not much to get with me, but they can take it all. I just let's go into the first point. Location. Who isn't that? So let's say I have an iPhone right now. In my location, that data is either with whenever I authorize an app, they have access to the location. The location's on my iPhone. This is data that Apple controls, correct?
To an extent, but look, the NSA can get a backdoor to all of this, and your location can function really in multiple ways. So the phone can utilize GPS technology to access your location. The phone can also utilize basically triangulation between different internet servers. You guys remember when the Google cars were running around a few years ago? Basically for Google Maps, gathering data, like, taking Street View and camera and so forth. One of the things that Google was doing at that time with those cars is they were mapping the location, not just using GPS, which would not have given as sort of finely granular and accurate location data as they needed. They were also basically tapping into any Wi-Fi systems and triangulating their location from local signal strength from Wi-Fi. And in addition to that, we found out later, and Google got its hand slapped, but not very severely. They were also reaching in and basically extracting the payload from those supposedly secure Wi-Fi signals. And so, that was a private company that was doing that work.
Aaron, let's go to the second one. They can turn on our microphone. Is that because I've heard this before?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a possibility? Is it factual? Because that's too extreme. What do you mean they can turn on our microphone?
Whether any particular government agency at any given time is going to want to do that is another question. But, Snowden's revelations actually tried to blow the lid on this a few years ago, and very few people paid much attention. If you read his book, you'll get more of a sense of actually what's feasible and what's possible. And that was what, 7 years ago when he blew the whistle over at the NSA. And things have advanced very considerably since then in terms of the amount of data that's gathered and again, the granular, fine-tuned level of detail at which that data can be analyzed.
Linus, I brought up Linus just quickly, and I'll go to also. Oh, sorry. Also, go ahead. Have you looked into this?
Yeah, no, what I would just say, from the capabilities, there's a reason why. I think the example is, why did Osama bin Laden rely on a courier, right? Anybody with technology, you can't be hidden. They can access everything you have. That's just a fact of reality, and then you just have to adjust and accept it, right?
No, but you'd assume, I would assume that Apple, getting a backdoor into Apple has that ability. I'm using an Apple device, but for Apple to give a backdoor to the government, legally
speaking, Microsoft and Apple will oblige to any formal government requests, especially when it's coming out of the NSA. But what I wanted to add on to Apple, what happens is, and this is very under the radar, MIT recently produced a study with the M1 and M2 chip, and they're looking at flaws, and it's called the Pac-Man flaw in that sense, where individuals are able to take access to pointers in the iOS, and the pointers will essentially delegate any formal tasks within your actual computer system. And there have been a lot of cases where cameras, microphones, and or other forms of audio devices, in the sense that your computer is continuously monitoring you in these processes, and it's continuously uploading this information to
Didn't Ring have a big scandal with this too? The Ring security bells?
Yeah, I think so as well.
What's the scandal they had?
Well, they were just completely hacked. Anybody could use them. People were the cameras that they put in for security were being put on them, and photos were taken, dark web, porno sites, etc. It was completely, it wasn't a good thing.
Yeah. And look,
but Mario, for 10 Bitcoin, I'll make sure that doesn't happen to you.
Not even
protocol. Hold on, protocol. If you could do what Aaron mentioned regarding the CEO he knows that had his phone hacked and remove the ability for whoever to get the location and all that stuff. If you could do this protocol, which you still didn't get WhatsApp, which you promised me you will, but if you could do this, you already come up on my stage all the time, but I don't know, you can be co-host and mute everyone and talk by yourself the whole time. Aaron, yeah. So also, actually, before going to Aaron, also, so you were talking about the capabilities. Is anyone surprised about this? Is it just me? Like, I'm surprised. I know Apple has those capabilities, but I thought the system in the US, wasn't there a murder a while ago, and the authorities, I don't know who has background noise, but the authorities wanted access to an iPhone, and
that
Apple
was marketing,
fought back.
Mario. That was marketing. That was, look at how strong Apple's being. They won't even cooperate with the FBI on this case. That was a marketing operation to give cover to both the public and private entity in that case, and to falsely reassure Americans that, a good, well-meaning company like Apple or Google would never compromise your data, even in a criminal investigation. I'm sorry, but that was
marketing worked, Aaron.
Marketing psyop.
Here I am talking about it.
Mario, I'll just say, I think the standard procedure in every these spaces is like, you're the one guy that is not tracking all this, and all this space, all your guests are like, yeah, no, that's just totally normal. Like,
yeah,
totally
this is. I think this is why, and this is like my spaces. What I do these spaces, I started them. I just wanted to learn shit. I started them in crypto, and now I'm learning stuff that makes me question my life, which is my phone, which I do everything on my phone. I'm literally talking to you guys. I'm just staring at my phone right now. I'm just thinking it's staring back at me.
Well,
I had
Mario,
my team, Aaron. I had my team. Hold on, Aaron. Just to tell you something interesting, Aaron. Before I go back to you, when I interviewed Hunter Biden on the show and things didn't go well and Fox was covering it, my team wouldn't talk to me. Not all my team, just some of my team members. No joke, and I was laughing at them, making fun of them. They would not talk to me on WhatsApp anymore. They would only communicate to me on Signal, and we wouldn't make the same jokes that if they go public, I'll get in trouble. We wouldn't make those jokes anymore privately. And now I'm thinking like I'm the idiot, and they were right.
Well, look.
But seriously, get Signal. Use Signal.
Yeah, it's very funny to watch your reaction, because 10 minutes ago you said, well, I'm not worried about it because I have nothing to hide, which is what most normal, decent people say, right? Well, they want to extract my data, whatever. I have nothing to hide. But then when you begin to wrap your head around the full scope of the surveillance and the full scope of what can be known about you at any given moment, people who have nothing to hide still have the right to privacy and the right to sanctuary, the right to be free from prying eyes.
But they'll get you anyway, Aaron, right? People don't realize there are so many laws on the book. In certain states, if you collect rainwater, you go to jail. Like if they put a target on you, there's going to be one obscure law that is never enforced that will be selectively enforced against you. Let's say hypothetically you treat trespassing like it's insurrection, and you will be the example made.
But Prodigal, let me just finish my point, because I think it goes to this whole question of how is it that people are passive in the face of this growing surveillance state. And I think it moves along the lines of where Mario started versus where he is now. First of all, you keep the details, withheld from people. They don't know the full scope of what's going on. And you call anyone who talks about this a conspiracy theorist. And then you have nothing to hide. So what do you have to worry about is a great way to put people to sleep. Mario now wants his phone hacked and secured, as probably all of the people listening to this do, not because we have something to hide, but because nobody else has the right to extract information in that way. And you can obviously imagine how bad actors could abuse that sort of
Aaron,
power.
Aaron, can they access my WhatsApp messages? It's encrypted.
Yeah, Mario, I have definitive proof that they can
don't use that.
Certain aspects of it. This came out in our Missouri v. Biden case, Mario. This is really interesting. So we subpoenaed information on censorship between Meta and the federal government. One of the recent documents we got showed that Meta, and keep in mind, Meta owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Meta was censoring COVID-related information, not just on Facebook and Instagram, which I think wouldn't surprise anyone. These are people post things to these, and they're publicly facing. And you assume if I put something out there on Instagram, lots of people are going to be able to see it. Same with Facebook. They were censoring the sharing of information also on WhatsApp. And you say, okay, well, how did that happen? It says secure and encrypted end to end. This seems like a private messaging app for my close friends, my family, the people I communicate with, one-on-one or small groups. Well, the algorithm could identify things like the sharing of links. And if you shared a disfavored link to an article or video, your Twitter space, whatever, then the app would limit the number of times you could share it. It would look like you shared it, but it actually wouldn't show up on the other end, things of that nature. So
hold on. So Aaron, I just want to, this is, because we covered this in the Twitter files, wasn't WhatsApp just censoring not the actual information you share, the ability to mass forward information? For example, you can only forward to 5 people, or you can't forward to groups.
So the only thing I have definitive evidence for is the latter. I don't have definitive evidence yet that they could actually censor the secure and encrypted content that you typed into the WhatsApp message. However, I would be shocked if the NSA couldn't access that information, if they don't have some sort of backdoor to even look at.
How can you have backdoor encryption? What am I missing?
Well, every encryption has a way to be de-encrypted. That's how the other person sees it on the other end. So, it's a matter of having
you cannot have someone.
Key.
Sorry, but you cannot have someone peeking in the middle. Sorry, you cannot have someone peeking in the middle. It's impossible. It's end-to-end encrypted, so you have to have the keys.
The only one, Linus.
That's where
saying the only way. Yeah, but the backdoors. When you say backdoors, how do backdoors work? And Linus, you're deep in the AI, and I brought you up for that reason. When people say backdoor, how does it work? And is encryption the only way to decrypt it? Somewhere in the middle, decrypting it is through quantum computing. Is that like what breaks everything?
Yeah, no, there's no quantum computing involved here. I think what could happen and what might happen if NSA is involved is that the shared keys or the encrypted keys that live on my device, for example, if you and me are communicating, they are not actually only on my device; they live somewhere else as well. But that's we're in gray territory. If we look at Europe, for example, where we've had EncroChat, which has been used by a lot of illegal activities, right? They had to actually hack EncroChat to even be able to read back what these individuals had been messaging each other. There was no way for them to go through any of the smartphone providers. There was just no way to get any information out. They had to do a social hack. They had to get inside of EncroChat to be able to read these things. So I'm finding it very it's fringe to kind of talk about the ability to Apple to see everything, because it's not really that easy. Because if it were, then it would be more readily available for everyone to kind of consume on Tor or wherever to find this information. It's really tricky to do these type of decrypts.
Is it possible to do it in a targeted way? I mean, if a government agency wanted to get some specific piece of information from some specific identifiable individual, I would think they have especially if they have a FISA warrant. FISA warrants. I'm sure they have a way to deal with the companies to allow them to extract that information. I would just be shocked based on what I know if that wasn't the case. Linus, am I wrong about that?
Yeah.
I hope I'm wrong. It'd be great if I'm wrong.
And Linus, to kind of add on, I'll let you answer this one, Linus. I've got another question for you as well, from what Aaron said.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're wrong in the sense that they don't really. So my encrypted keys are not really stored anywhere else. And the only way I could think about this is if they had access to this secure enclave on device, but the secure enclave doesn't have connectivity to anywhere else outside of the device. That's why you kind of brick. If you lose your passcode to your phone, you're pretty fucked. No one can really get back into your phone. Not even Apple. It's not like there's not even a physical hardware wire into the enclave. It's literally blocked from the rest of the phone. So you would have to open the phone. You'd have to physically change the structure of a silicon that's sealed to get that data out from the enclave. But then again, there are other components in the phone that you could get into, and some data could be saved. But I mean, literally, if you fuck up your phone, then you can't really get your data back. So
if you forget your passcode, passcode to your phone, Apple cannot unlock it.
You're fucked. But the thing is, like, some of these things that we're talking about WhatsApp, and we're talking about sending stuff over.
But you're also assuming that the phone is.
Hold on. Protocol.
Right.
Hold on. We'll give you the mic in a bit. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Linus.
What we're talking about, like when we're sending data, communicating on WhatsApp, we're no longer in the phone, right? All the data is being sent over there. It's encrypted end to end, so the data that's being sent cannot be peeked at. We cannot do a man-in-the-middle attack. However, there could be some instance where the receiving end, the keys are shared with someone else. So when the message has been received, there could be some sort of vantage attack or some sort of attack where we could peer into the data that's been sent. But there's no way to like punch it in the middle of the air and just grab it and read it, because it would.
So So and I think for each message.
Wait, just to be clear, you're talking about WhatsApp, right? You're not talking about actual cell phones. You're talking specifically about WhatsApp.
No, you guys were talking about WhatsApp and we're talking about like sending messages, but like on the actual device, like if you take my phone, my physical phone, and you don't have my passcode, you will. It's impossible for you to get any data off my phone, right?
When you issue a warrant for surveillance, you don't take the phone. The person has the phone, still uses the phone, correct? I mean, if Iran has the capabilities to do this with their phones there, trust me, the NSA and our own agencies here far surpass their capabilities, right?
There are methods, if I could hop in here, there are methods to scoop up data. And we've seen this in U.S. cities, for example, in Boston, through Stingray applications. There are technologies to be able to scoop up people's information, their data. So directly from your devices. As Dr.
So this
Cariardi mentioned,
is that just the Stingray? When you say Stingray applications, is that like an app you download that is designed to kind of get data and send it through to the other party? Is that what a Stingray application is?
Stingray is a hardware/software unit that can scoop data on a massive level from certain geographical areas. So we have seen this deployed in Baltimore, for example. When there were riots there, they had blimps floating around. There have been many instances where Stingray has been deployed by government agencies in certain areas to scoop people's data directly from their devices. There's many ways to scoop your data from your phone. And I would like to point out that Google itself got its seed money from, it was In-Q-Tel, which essentially was seed money from the CIA and NSA. So they created essentially Google. Then they later, tried to distance themselves from that. But the internet itself has seeds in DARPA, which is the military. It's the defense. Program. It's like their intelligence program. DARPA,
I would say if the CIA did invest in Google, but there's many others that invested in Google, doesn't mean they should have access to they should have a back door within Google. I think it's a question worth asking, but I just don't think it immediately implies that they have a back door.
Well, initially it was set up for the U.S. Intelligence agencies to control that paradigm, to control that space, right? I mean, you think they're just going to, get in cahoots with DARPA to create the internet and just unleash it, for everyone to share cat videos, or are they going to use it to try to surveil, monitor, and assess information that's taking place? Like,
are you familiar with the CIA's LifeLog project, and do you believe there's any connections to that in Facebook's founding? If you are,
maybe I would like
what the Twitter files have shown here is that the big tech industries not only have become an extension of these government agencies, but we know through prior investigations that they got their seed money from them. So this is a way to circumvent rule of law and privacy and everything like that, to where I just personally believe that anything digital can be hacked and cracked. And you need to be careful. It doesn't matter if you're using what you believe to be safe and encrypted whatevers. Like you're online, they're online.
Linus, I'd love, Linus, jump in.
I just want to touch on Stingrays, because Stingrays is a very unique use case, and there's some merit to what you can do with Stingrays. So to just give an idea what a Stingray is, it's like a physical device. It's military grade. It's basically done by DARPA, like with email and voice calls. But what the Stingray tries to do, and it is a short radius device, right? You cannot deploy a Stingray and give it like a 50-mile radius. It's like it's going to work on 4, 3, maybe tops 5 miles radius, and it forces all the active devices within the area to downgrade to 2G, because when you're on 2G, there's less encryption in the network, so you're more prone to be targeted with kind of over-the-air attacks where you're sniffing the traffic that's going on. So this is what a Stingray can do, but you cannot have a Stingray for an entire country. This is just not possible. We're talking impossible technology.
So Linus, I have from it. You're pretty technical, and you kind of offer a kind of balancing perspective on all this. What should we be concerned about? So, for example, the ability to turn on your microphone anytime. That one for me sounded really, really extreme.
Even if the phone is off, I would love to see like proof of this. I would love to see someone in the hacker community show that, like, and publish it, because I mean, you publish it, you know, it's gonna go wild, right? Like if you have a phone that's turned off, physically, like turned off, and you can.
No, if it's turned on, could they enable? Would they be able to turn on the microphone? Would an application be able to turn on the microphone without authority anytime if the phone is on?
Not if it's a third-party application from someone on an iOS device, for example. I don't know about Android, but on an iOS device, if a third-party developer has done anything, they cannot turn on the microphone without consent. Apple could. Apple have the opportunity, like the possibility to do this, and carriers can do things as like sending certain messages and message types that will push through any kind of situation. Like if there's an emergency, for example, you can get, I think you have this in the US, where you can get weather alerts, even though there's like no cell signal, no nothing, you can still get alerts pushed to your phone. So that's kind of, what you can do, but that's very limited in data. If you're talking about turning on the video, like the camera, and start streaming that, like there's a lot of things that I haven't seen anything in the security community about this where it's feasible. Like it would be everywhere. If this was possible, it would be everywhere, because it's so, it's a big thing, right?
And
how
this
about
is a really important distinction I think Linus made earlier was software and hardware in that sense, right? And I don't know if Linus knows the Pac-Man, because it's a hardware malfunction within the M1 chip in that sense, and how they're aggregating their actual nodes in that sense, and it allows for a deficiency within the actual iOS and the pointers and how anything is coded. But long story short, I was just curious as to what are the fail-safes between software and hardware, and what are the capability differences in these two nuances?
And Linus, I'll add on to that question. By the way, I brought up Sibila, who's a technology consultant at Microsoft, so we'll probably get her perspective as well.
Yeah, it would be nice to get her perspective. So I just want to touch on Pac-Man. So Pac-Man is a very interesting case, and it's only M1 so far as we're concerned, and M1 is not in any iOS device. It's basically the new Mac. So we got MacBook Pro and MacBook Air, and it is an interesting vulnerability, but that's what all that it is. It's a vulnerability, and it's not so sure yet what the larger implications are for the for everyday use. So, but yeah,
we trust. But we are kind of. But is it a fact that we are trusting a few parties that have the ability to Apple, for example, have the ability to turn on your camera, turn on your microphone. So we have to trust that there's no backdoor at Apple. And in terms of the hardware, we have to make it to trust, and I'm using the term backdoor very loosely. We have to trust there's no backdoor within the chip, because and I know this is sounding conspiratorial, and we just don't know, but if the government does have a backdoor into Apple, or we're at world war or that we're at a war and suddenly they've got more powers, they've got backdoor into Apple, and if they do get a backdoor to the chip manufacturer, could a lot of these things suddenly become possible?
Yeah, theoretically.
I mean, all they have to do is show the warrant, and Apple will most likely comply. Like, we don't know the scope of Apple's compliance with federal agencies. We're talking about all this hacker bullshit. If anything, we've seen with the Twitter files is that they comply overwhelmingly. At least one big tech company, and I know Apple, at least by political donations, was even more left than Twitter. So I mean, we can talk about James Bond, this and that, but in the end, They go to Apple, especially when they're in the antitrust review right now, and they say,
So
"Hey,
let
these
me
specific accounts, I want this,
protocol.
that."
Let me
Apple's
go.
gonna comply.
COVID app protocol. All right. So before going to COVID, Sibila, I want to ask you that same question. Is the concern that we should have, instead of a concern on whether there's an application that has access, etc., it's mainly Apple and the chip manufacturers that have those powers, and all our concern should be whether they have any backdoor. Is that a good way to frame?
No, actually, the concern you should be having is yourself and zero trust. So technology, doesn't matter if it's broken or not. You can't guarantee if it's not our government that it's not going to be somebody else, or just somebody who wants to steal your identity so they can take your financial wellness and make it their own. So if you look at through history, though, I like to show the capabilities through gap analysis of the recent 2-3 years of what we see. We saw that they had to take the big tech to Congress and to force them to comply. It happened more than once. We saw them take Bank of America and others in order to get records to figure out who was using their accounts in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. All this is in Congress. If they could do it without this exposure, they wouldn't risk the exposure on TV and C-SPAN, etc., etc. Transparency is important, so I don't think you are necessarily paying attention to the fact that if they had these capabilities, they wouldn't be the trials and the corroboration, the paying relationships that happen in order to be able to get some of those things or the lawsuits or the Congress and other aspects of it. Also, in order to detect a hacker, I believe, I don't remember, no, maybe it was the QAnon leader, I'm not sure. They were trying to find somebody. They actually had to employ analysis algorithm to figure out based on the content of the text, how it was written, who was writing it, and that's how they ended up catching that. And even before technology was around, phones were being monitored because of the technology aspect of it. It required it, the technology required at one point to have a switch operator, to have some kind of infrastructure capabilities to listen to analyze quality of a call or in the analog systems. But in digital world, I don't think they're as connected as you guys would think. And on top of everything, we've always been our own worst enemies. We're the ones who expose our data. We're the ones who download apps that we think it's one thing and it turns out to be the backdoor of the CCP and keep it over time because somebody required it to just visit the Olympic Games. There's all sorts of user faults, and you usually are not aware of happening because you expose bits and pieces in different places, and it doesn't take much to install something to track your keystrokes. And that will surpass any kind of algorithm. If it's keylogger, whatever you're touching or doing, etc., or if there's a clone of your phone or other things, there's ways to go around them. But don't assume that you can protect yourself, because even if it's not your phone, the transport and all the other things in between, all the layers, all the owners, all the providers, somebody will get infiltrated. So just think of zero trust, and if you don't know what it is, I would very highly recommend looking at it and watching some videos on YouTube, and assume that what you are living out in the open world is the same as what you're living in the digital world, except you maybe draw more attention in the digital world, because you give up your intentions by your body language. You give up if you're lying or telling the truth and all those things.
I want to quickly go to Emergent briefly. Emergent, your experience at NORAD. Do you think the government has backdoors to Apple or other big tech companies, or are we, overdoing it?
I also have a background in network architecture, so I can speak to this. So let me kind of simplify this discussion down to, maybe this will kind of funnel some thinking in a more positive direction. This is kind of a path of least effort problem. There's all these ways that the government could, or companies that want your data could possibly get it, but this kind of comes down to, what is the easiest way for them to get it? If there's an easy way for them to get it, they're going to use that way instead of crazy backdoor hacking techniques. So an example is at one point we talk about hardware and software backdoors. If you go back to the documents that Snowden dropped at the time, he was the prime document that people reference in there was the NSA program Bull Run that talked about the agenda to put abilities to obtain encryption keys in common software, common applications, etc. What's more revelatory there than the specific things that they were using at the time is the agenda that they were trying to do it. So what I would say is there's cases like at one point Cisco had to do a recall on routers and switches. I want to say this was around 2014 to 2016-ish, and they found that there were some subcomponents within network components. It was actually routers, switches, and I think there were a couple of firewall models too. And they found that Chinese companies at the behest of the Chinese government had implanted some hardware backdoors that intentionally left vulnerabilities in network interfaces so that Chinese hackers could come back later and try to get it. But these types of techniques, as I think it was Linus who alluded to, these types of infiltration tend to be found and fixed, and so Cisco did a whole recall on all of this. So I would venture to bet at this time, if we follow the path of least effort logic here, if the government wants your data, they're going to be much more likely to go to an easy place to get it, i.e. the big tech firms where they can do exactly what they did to. They're going to send people to tap them on the shoulder and say, give me access to this person's Gmail account. Give me access to this person's WhatsApp messages, assuming they have a representative there, as opposed to trying to do, Mission Impossible, dangle from the ceiling stunts to try and get your data, because the fact is they have easier ways to get it now. So that's my take on it. If anybody has any questions or input on that, I'd welcome your thoughts.
You're 100% right.
Input.
Go ahead,
some input, if I may, Mario. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Before input, COVID, before the input or anyone else, I just want to ask one more question, Emergent. Do you think they already have those backdoors? Do you think they already leverage them? Because am I trusting the system too much?
Well, I mean, and someone, I think it was it Suleiman said earlier, okay, if you're an Osama bin Laden level VIP, someone that the intelligence agencies are that interested in, then yes, I'm sure they're going to employ. I would just assume everything you say and do has been compromised. However, and I think where the concern of the average person is here is less so much, because the fact is, if you're that much in the crosshairs of the government, then they got you. They have the capability.
Mario, just it's over.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. Emergent. How about Emergent? How about things you delete? So if you delete messages, if you delete photos, if you delete emails, if you delete websites you visit, history, cookies, can that still be stored somewhere, or that's it? It's finally gone.
I'd say depends on the browser.
Can you clear your digital footprint? Let's look at what's the Chrome is the most common browser, so we could use that as an example.
You could do what Hillary Clinton did. Just use bit bleach, and then if you have Blackberries, you take hammers, put them in the microwave.
But go ahead a minute.
Yeah, Mario, it's very. Most people don't realize it's actually very, very difficult to really delete files, even on your computer, on your hard drive. They're still there somewhere. Almost all of the time, you drop something in the trash.
Sorry, Aaron, hold on. If you clear your trash, the data is still there?
Yeah.
Aaron, Linus just gave a thumbs up. No, I was expecting you to counter that. Linus, you're confirming what Aaron just said. If you clear your recycle bin, your stuff is still there.
Yes, I mean you have to delete it multiple times. I mean, there are apps you can install that kind of wipes your memory multiple times, and then it gets harder to read. But it's
people burning, melting their laptop there's logical reasons they're doing that. There's actual reasons to do that now.
Yeah, because the file is stored in multiple quote unquote places on your hard drive in sort of multiple ways when you save a Word document or a PDF or what have you. And when you're deleting it, you're kind of deleting, my understanding at a very non-technical level is you're deleting the pathway for your, to be able to pull it up. You're not necessarily deleting the file itself, or that piece of data can be recovered with the right know-how somewhere. And to actually get rid of it permanently is quite difficult, as I understand it.
What you're doing by default is you're actually freeing up the space, and you're simply telling the operating system, oh, by the way, this picture is still there, but you're telling the operating system if it needs to save something, it can now write over that space. Now, if you do like an empty the trash type thing, then again, you may be deleting it, but there's still forensics techniques where something on a hard drive can be files on an old hard drive can be restored because they can detect what the magnetic resonance was of the file when it was written there. That takes time to recover, but I mean there are routines for wiping hard drives when the government destroys classified drives. They typically do.
Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one. History on your browser. If you clear that. I just want to go through that thought process because I know a few hands up as well. COVID. I just want to continue that process with a few questions for Emergent before we go to yourself and Freemason and a couple of hands that were up earlier. So because this is pretty shocking to me. COVID. Emergent. History on a browser. Let's use Chrome for example. If you go there and clear history, clear cookies.
I think
is that good?
No. I think you can hear. Well, I think what you can do is you can eliminate kind of the local cache of those things. But remember, if you're communicating with a website, then the remote end probably still has whatever data that you communicate to that website or the cookies. So you take you go and browse your Amazon shopping history. Well, you can delete your browser all you want, but they could still go to Amazon and say, "Give us Mario's shopping history," right? So there's a eliminating things on your browser end and reducing cookies can kind of lower your footprint, so to speak. But it really probably more of it is what's stored on the remote end of that website or that service.
Okay,
Mario,
and then
he sent me all of your internet browsing history, even the private websites that you've deleted.
Good man.
You to know that I've got that on you now, so
that's
be
cool,
on your
man.
best behavior.
Cool, man. Cool. You know all the cartoons I watch at night before going to bed.
Exactly.
So Emergent private tabs, do they work?
Emergent, wait. Listen, Mario, I understand your concern, but the free consultation is over. If you want to retain my client service, the money talks. He needs to retain it.
Imagine, like now all the criminals are going into my space to see how they can wipe everything. So I'm like, this is the space. All the scammers are like, hey man, we're in shit. We got to come here and see how we can wipe everything. So Emergent, back to the discussion. Private tabs, do they work in keeping things private?
I'd say that kind of depends on the browser. Probably with and I actually think better than using like a Chrome browser would be something Chromium, that's the open source version of Chrome based. I think Brave browser is actually a pretty decent one. I'd say using that with private tabs is again, it's fairly safe, but you have to keep in mind that your footprint is on two ends of the connection. There's what you have on your local end, but if you go to a XXX website, there's very little to stop them from storing. And again, that's really what a private browsing tab does for you, is it provides a minimum of information to that other end that is even retrievable. So
okay. And people recommend VPNs. Do they someone told me not long ago, if you use a double connection VPN, any browsing history, anything like that is generally protected outside of what's stored in your on your device. Nothing is stored if you use a private tab and if you use double connection VPN.
That really depends on where the remote end of that VPN is and what if the remote end is in China, then I would trust it a lot less than if it's in someplace a little bit more obscure. And one of the Snowden revelations was that part of the NSA Bull Run program was to put backdoors in some of those commercial VPNs. Although to what degree they've succeeded, I think it's still. Yeah. I mean, if you really wanted to be absolutely as secure as possible, I would get something that's more like an open source minimum footprint VPN as opposed to something commercial like, NordVPN, any of those ones that the YouTubers, spam the advertisements for.
What are your thoughts on Pegasus?
What is Pegasus?
What is Pegasus?
Some people are alleging that it's basically some type of ability to gain all this software from the phones. I don't know. I assumed you would know what it is. I don't know. That's why I was asking.
Doesn't sound plausible to me, but it's something I can research and look into.
COVID, you wanted to add on to the discussion?
Yes, thank you, Mario. I appreciate that. And, if people are worried about their smartphones spying on them, I just want to refer you to a Wired article that was from 2012, where the then CIA chief, David Petraeus, stated that we'll spy on you through your dishwasher. Now, this was a smart dishwasher. Basically, anything that's connected to the internet.
But what was the context of him saying that? Was it just as a joke, or do you know the context of that statement? So maybe he's just stating that, hey, we have very strong abilities to be able to spy on you, but not genuinely be able to spy through your smart devices. I'm just curious.
If they can spy on you through your dishwasher, they can certainly spy on you through your cell phone. Anything that's connected to the internet was the context essentially. And I DM'd you the Wired article where the CIA chief, David Petraeus, mentioned this. And I'd also like to point out that I also sent you an Axios article where they covered WikiLeaks. Vault 7. This was known as Vault 7 release, which talked about a 0-day program that the CIA was running, where they turned iPhones, Android devices, Windows operating systems, Samsung TVs, basically anything that's hooked up to the internet, to where they can switch them on at any time and surveil you. I just want to emphasize the point that anything that's connected to the internet can be hacked and cracked, and they can look at. And when we take into consideration that the intelligence agencies themselves played a hand in creating the internet, and then the big tech companies have become an extension of these government agencies themselves. Like, how can we trust any of them? They have shown no respect for the rule of law. There's something called parallel construction, to where they can garner information from you, from illicit activity, for example, if they believe you're breaking the law, and they obtain that information illegally, because we're protected supposedly here in the US. We have rights and everything, and they're not supposed to be doing this stuff. But if they gather this information from you illegally, that you are doing something that is against the law, then they start to build a case around that to try to get you to justify their investigation against you. So, yes, there is a big problem here with Silicon Valley, with the intelligence agencies and the internet itself. And I would say in this article right here from Axios, they say that the CIA uses hacks and cracks against your devices that bypass the encryption of WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, Webio, all of them. So just assume, just my advice, just assume if you're operating online, just assume that everybody can see it. Okay. So I'll
give you the mic in a bit, Jake. Yeah, actually, Jake, jump in. This will be relevant to your experience.
Yeah. I wanted everybody to be aware of, somebody mentioned Pegasus. There are two podcasts. Would you mind if I share them?
No, of course
not. Darknet Diaries is oh my goodness, every week or every episode is he goes in depth with a hacker, but also Hackable by McAfee. It's a few years old. He brings in experts almost every episode to hack things like your coffee machine, and he'll say, hey, you can't do this, can you? And he will bring in somebody who will literally on air during the show hack his smart coffee machine or hack the refrigerator or intercept the key fob for his car and be able to repeat or double the signal so that he can break into any car and start it. So both of those Darknet Diaries and Hackable they go into extreme detail. Everything COVID one was saying, they go into extreme detail and they actually will let you witness it. So, I mean, if you're interested in that, and there's an entire episode on Pegasus, the people who started it, how it's going and how it's being used. So I really recommend that to anybody who's interested in this conversation right now.
I just want to add to that.
Is that your line?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And COVID, it's like the things that you're talking about are great. I love Hackable, and I also love Darknet Diaries. And they're hacking things that has zero security in it, right? If you're making a coffee machine and you're connecting it to the internet, that company doesn't have a single engineer focused on security. We're talking about Apple, who's made it their mission to kind of become the privacy company of the world. It's slightly different to try to hack an iPhone than it is to try to sniff out the key fob from your new Mercedes-Benz, right? So I think just it's really important to keep these two things separate. Like, yes, I can hack my fridge. It's not the same thing as I can hack my iPhone. So just keep that in context.
Mario, I got to head down. I just wanted to say, I think this conversation is needless because I think all these governments are going to comply, especially when they're going to, one way or another, rely on government regulation or handouts to exist. And a lot of these big tech and media companies are connected to the government through government contracts. I mean, the government is a big purchaser in all industries now, people. So a lot of people don't want to piss off their biggest client. I think we're talking about a lot of nonsense. But they said Michael Ray Curry. I think he's down there. He's supposed to be knowledgeable on this. I'm not, but I'm going to head down, listen for a little bit, then head out. Everybody take care.
Thanks, Protocol. Thanks, bro. Linus, quick question. So back to the back door. I know you got to go. You got to put the kids to bed, Linus. But back doors. You said with backdoors into the chip and into Apple in this example, that would be the point of concern. So it's like trusting the systems rather than the devices. So would you say if there's a backdoor to a VPN provider, a backdoor to Apple,
I think it was said. Yeah, I think it was said before. Or even the government wants your data. There's easier ways to do it than try to like go through all these hoops to obtain it. Like a backdoor into a VPN, like it's a really far-fetched way to go about to get some data, right? It's much easier to call your bank and go, hey, I want the bank statements of this guy, or
no, but that's common. But that's public. But people try to hide. More and more people are trying to use VPNs, use different ways to hide things they do.
You're going to be 99% more secure behind a VPN, regardless if it's NordVPN or Pegasus, or if you're using some other service, right? If you're just browsing the internet on even, at home, it's easy for third parties that, if you're browsing the internet, for them to get your data. I mean, I've been in the tech industry for almost 20 years. Sniffing data from people using the internet is like, it's business. That's what everyone does, right? But when we're talking about like sending messages privately on secure chats and whatnot, that's slightly different. It's not like you browsing the internet through a browser. There's a lot of people that said it really well here. Like, yeah, you can use Chromium or other device a bit more open source, and you can try to hide behind a VPN. I mean, there's tons of things you can do to be more secure. You will never be 100% secure. That's just like, that's it. You'll never be 100% secure. But there are some things thrown around that's like, yeah, not really. Yeah, there's like, yes, it's doable, but if it was a big deal, then these things would be more public. So just maybe close out.
Yeah, and something I say. Yes, something I've said as well, Linus, is that the government is just not good at keeping secrets. We've seen leak after leak after leak. We've seen, Snowden was given as an example before. So just something worth keeping in mind. But I'd go to Emergent to add on to the chat just briefly.
On that point, I'll give you the interrupt. But we have to take into consideration as well, some of the leaks may be intentional, because if we remember back to when Snowden revelations came out that the NSA was watching and spying on everything, what it did was it created an environment to where people began to self-censor. They began to shut down and be quiet because they were afraid that people were listening, that the government was listening, so that was a form of self-censorship. And many speculate
I wouldn't say,
could
but I
have
wouldn't say
been.
I wouldn't say Edward Snowden's leak is intentional. Like the guy's in Russia. The amount of stuff he leaked,
I'm saying that the end result of what took place from the Snowden revelations was that people began to self-censor, right? So that's something that we should take into consideration, that sometimes there are controlled leaks to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're watching everything you do. And what are you going to do about it? Because nothing has changed. Nothing happened. No one was held accountable. Yes, we all know that the NSA is watching and spying on everything that we do, and it's illegal. And the Snowden revelations proved that. But what has changed since then? Nothing. It normalized it. So it's an interesting and important point that I just wanted to mention there. Thank you.
COVID, you're right, because what you're trying to say is not that Snowden intentionally did that, but what happened was when people didn't speak out about it, that's when the government realized that it's acceptable to do this, and hence why we even put this topic in here in the first place. The fact that, again, people are accepting the extension of 702 is another example of why the government will continue to do these measures. Who are you going to go to, Mario?
Emergent. I want to go to Emergent to add on to what was said by Linus earlier.
Sure, I agree. I think a lot of it is kind of psychological self-censorship and censorship in nature. It's also that there's practical limitations on the back end of I mean, if they were surveilling everybody everywhere at all times 24/7, where's all this being stored, right? At some point, every data management has to start deciding what is or isn't important. Where I think this is more relevant to the average American's concerns, assuming you're not an Osama bin Laden level VIP that they're that interested in, where the average person's concerns probably intersect with this space is more the mass surveillance. Going back to the Ring doorbell study is Amazon created the Ring doorbells, and they said, oh, you sign your user agreement, and then, it's all private. But then one day they did like a software patch that's, when you activate the thing or download the patch, it says, oh, accept, end user license terms. And it said, oh, yeah, by the way, now we can take your data and store it and blah, blah, blah. And then they did another update and said, now we can share it with third parties. So the concern there was that there were some law enforcement agencies that did warrant requests to Amazon for the contents or the footage or the storage from people's Ring doorbell cameras. And then the law enforcement agencies started harassing Amazon with these warrant requests. And then this is not dissimilar from what happened in the Twitter files. They were harassing Twitter with all these warrant requests. And then they said, well, you want to lower your workload with all these. Why don't you just give us what we want, or let us send you large lists of things that we want? So what ended up happening, I think it was the first ones were in, I think either Washington State or Oregon, where law enforcement agencies made these requests to Amazon saying, oh, well, we just want blanket access to get into anybody's Ring doorbell camera within our jurisdiction, and Amazon complied with it. And so that leads to a scenario where, everybody says, the classic argument against this stuff was, well, if you don't like an Amazon Ring doorbell, then don't buy one. But the reality is now, and there were a couple of documented cases where the law enforcement agencies in question had surveilled somebody's house, not using their Ring doorbell camera, but they said, oh, well, your neighbor across the street has one that is pointing at your house, and they could then use that one to surveil you. Right. So this is where, and I think it's more the blanket surveillance requests, the overly broad. That's where it gets really tricky. And that's where I think the average person's concerns probably come more into play. It's not so much that the government is really going to go after you specifically, but that they're generally collecting all this stuff on you, and who knows what they're doing with it, right? And it's the government, it's the corporations too.
Yeah, it's like I've made an argument that is it fair to say that censorship is not censorship? What was it? Privacy is dead. I've said this before, and I even said like it's not.
It's privacy under the intent of corporate mitigations and delegations of your private information in that sense. So if you're doing interactions with AT&T, Amazon, you're doing it by virtue that they're going to utilize that information in a trustful manner. But then when we're looking at the mandated obligations that U.S. corporations must oblige within, let's say, legal information, and especially within the Freedom of Information Act, the addition of information they need to comply with the government, it's quite compounding in that sense. And Prodigal brought in a very relevant point, and I'm going to end it here because, again, I'm more of a financier in that sense. But if we're looking at the relations between pension funds and governments, essentially AT&T composes roughly $119 billion worth of pension structures, and they will work in accordance with that stimulus and with the governments in associations with any programs that they need in order to ensure that stimulus. And it's by virtue of the functions of, let's say, government initiating stimulus within corporations, and this by virtue too big to fail. Essentially, we saw this in 2008, 2010. We had a internal relation between corporations, U.S. corporations, and let's say the governments. And there is always precedence for nationalizations of, let's say, network companies and or agricultural and even energy corporations. There is actual precedence within emergency fiscal responses. The Jane and Whole Fiscal Emergency Act of 2021 alludes to a potential nationalization in a context where it's militarized. I apologize for that long tangent there, Mario, but I'm going to let you go ahead.
Yeah, like what I was saying before is like I would say what was it? Not censorship, privacy. Privacy is dead. And what I added to it, and I was kind of hesitant to say it here, but I would say like, and it's not really a bad thing. And that was kind of my mindset was like, I have nothing to hide. I've never done anything wrong. And to this day, I've got nothing to hide. But then you start to realize like any piece of information can be twisted anyway, and they can be used against you in different ways. And there's things that could not really be illegal but when you're a certain, like, let's say you're president of the United States, the smallest things could get you in trouble. You could be taking a selfie with a naked girl and suddenly that could destroy your whole presidency. So that's where like it just gets starts to get really really scary. And it's not going to be scary for the average Joe, in my opinion, but it's going to be scary as you become more public. Protocol was making fun of me, and I gave the example of when I interviewed Hunter Biden. Suddenly all my team want to use Signal. And then he keeps making fun of me because obviously now I care more about privacy than I did, but let's say a year ago. It's not because anything's changed. My information is the same. I really have nothing to hide. I always said this. But when you become more public, then you like start rethinking those things.
I was just gonna say like I was one of those people that always said like who cares if you're not doing anything wrong? Then what is there to worry about? And then my home was raided and they went through my trash and they went through my hard drives and they went through all my personal documents. And then I started realizing this is horrible. I mean, it's an invasion of privacy. I wasn't even charged with anything and they did all of that. And they were basically tracking me for months and months and months, following me. And it's scary. So like, I understand people that say that, but there really is a lot to worry about. I mean, they find all sorts of things about you that's not illegal, but you don't want other people to know about. You have your own privacy.
I don't know. Do you think I keep saying do you consider like a privacy is dead, whether we like it or not, and we're going to continue seeing that death gradually over the next 2 decades?
Yeah. I mean, with technology and how everything's so interconnected, I think there's no doubt that it's dead. I think that
I wouldn't say it's dead. I would say privacy is analog. You've got to go analog if you want privacy.
Yeah, no,
but then it's going. But analog, you can't live analog anymore. It's already very difficult today. Imagine in 10 years' time, your you're like one of those, you know how now there's tribes in the Amazon and stuff that get discovered. They haven't had any interaction with humanity whatsoever. You start becoming one of those people as more and more people move into that virtual world, what people are calling the metaverse. Life is going to be all of it virtual. So I just don't.
Yeah, I mean, anybody could go off the grid and live in the woods and all that. But then, I mean, what are you sacrificing? You're at a major disadvantage in life.
It's really a question. Do they need leverage on you for any reason? I mean, if you're just one of the average Joe schmoes and there's no need to leverage you or twist your arm or take your data, the thing that you have to worry about is risk of theft and identity theft from not the government, but from hackers and criminals who are exploiting, through social engineering, stealing your passwords. There's people that will order Chipotle using free accounts. They don't even know who they belong to, but they're sold on the dark net for $200 for a giant packet of accounts and things like that. So, or like $5, someone will order a pizza to your house with a stolen account. So, I mean, those people are going to manipulate you and take advantage of you. But for the government, like you said, Mario, if there's a president and you need some sort of leverage on him, or you're a politician and you say, hey, we want you to do us this small favor, and if you don't, we'll release this information. You really do have to worry if you have some kind of someone has a need to leverage you for something. Then your information you don't have privacy unless you're fully analog.
Yeah, but the thing is, Jake, what concerns me is like why I consider privacy a lot more important. Brian, you talked about your example of how you had your home raided. Well, my example is relatively similar. I had a lot of financials leaked and everything leaked. Conversation, because I'm like if you guys hear how transparent I am, I used to record all my calls, business calls, and a lot of people in my team would have access to them. For example, so I was really bad at OPSEC, Operation Security, and I had a lot of stuff leaked. I'm like, fine. When I got a leak, I didn't care. The person threatened me, tried to get money for leaking. I'm like, no, I don't care. You can leak them because I have nothing to hide. But then they start getting twisted in different ways. It'll be like an angry message from one person could be turned into a whole story that's completely far from the truth. So that's why I start considering privacy. I start, taking it a lot more seriously. Because you don't have to have anything to hide to want your stuff being private. But I also genuinely think privacy is dead. Like Freemason, I don't know your thoughts, but I think in a decade or so, people are going to talk today on like a few decades. You talk to your parents, your kids will say to you, like, really? People wouldn't know these things about you?
Yeah, I mean, listen, hey guys, Freemason Brendan Green here from
your mic, man. We can't hear you, Freemason. Your mic is dead.
Hey, can
Not
you
sure
hear
if you can fix it. Yeah, it's really bad, man. I'll give you a bit just to fix it. I'll go to Joe in the meantime. Joe?
Yeah, Mar. To your point, I know someone who was an MMA fighter. He of course went to the gym a lot. He sent a message to a friend of his that was asking, "Do you know where I can get steroids?" He's like, "I have no idea, man. Why don't you go check Silk Road?" Right? He winded up having to do probation for sending someone to Silk Road who then bought steroids and got caught. So you do need to be careful.
Hold on, Brian is buying, and sorry if it's a stupid question, but buying steroids is illegal?
In the States it is, but he didn't even buy it.
Oh, really?
He just
hold on. Sorry, 2 seconds. Buying steroids isn't like I just keep hearing all these different boxers and wrestlers using steroids and becoming common knowledge. Wasn't that big celebrity, the meat guy? I forgot his name.
Liver King.
Liver King never used steroids, and he uses steroids. But is that because of legality?
So there's ways to get them legally, I assume. Like you can get a prescription. You know the right doctors. There's doctors that you can go to get them to write a prescription for you. But you can't just buy them on the street or buy them on the black market or have a friend sell them to you. That's illegal.
Yeah, but he didn't even buy it. He just told someone to go to Silk Road, and because of a law that exists in the U.S. that if you are involved at all in the chain of the purchase, you are just as guilty as the person who sold it, which I found to be completely ridiculous. But you never know when you say it, of course you didn't know he was breaking a law, but it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I'll Far out. Like I changed the title of the space. We started off, this is a daily space we're going to do where we cover breaking news. I didn't expect it to take this long. But now I'm going to go start melting my phones and laptop and using Tor, the browser Tor, and having VPNs. And I'm going to stop laughing at my team that's taking everything seriously. So anyone emergent, I'm going to be DMing you. Protocol, you offered your services, I'm going to DM you. And Aaron as well. Just get some tips. But that's concerning stuff. We started covering the Ukraine war, the developments there. We're not going to talk about Andrew Tate. We'll do that tomorrow. But in brief, Sleiman, I think there were documents about him potentially having cancer, but there's more information on this. So let's cover it tomorrow. And we've talked about the Biden's Surveillance Act, and that's what led to this rabbit hole where we are today in the title of the space. But yeah, I think that's it. That's a good place to end it, Sleiman. Anything?
Are we going to do the Elon thing? Okay.
No, let me do it tomorrow, bro. Like I need to recover from this discussion. Sleiman, anything else?
You have to go burn your phones right now.
No, I just.
If I may,
mean, you could probably do.
Sorry, if I may just. Sorry, thank you. Briefly, thank you for that. I would like to point out that the surveillance that we're talking about, that is taking place and that is rampant, was justified because of an emergency, right? Like if we look at every major event that has taken place recently here in our lifetimes that exceeds the normal parameters of the rule of law and everything like that, it's always justified by an emergency, right? So like 9/11, for example, paved the way, excuse me, for the Patriot Act, and everything that went along with it in the name of, fighting the terrorists, everything like that. That's what paved the way for this exact surveillance that we're talking about right now. Things that they would never normally be allowed or able to get away with, they are doing so now, like we had seen with what had taken place from COVID.
I completely agree with you, bro. And I say this a lot, that basically whenever they want to put draconian measures into place, they always do it against people you hate, and then they apply it to you. So in this scenario, of course, they used it against with the claims that, and bringing it back to the issue at hand, claims that they're using it against foreign agents, and then they used it to spy on the Americans. And then they've extended the bill, and that's why it was important to have this in here, or in today's discussion, that what they were extending it, and not many people spoke about it, and not many people highlighted it, and that's why I think Mario's space is important, because look how much discussion we've had about it. And recently we've had the White House release as well, haven't we? So all of these things are connected. Sorry, Mario, I'll let you finish.
Before you wrap it up, Sleiman, Emergent, can you just give us quick tips on what people could do today? Just very briefly, I don't want to start a new discussion. To wrap the space, quick tips they could do today to protect their privacy from, and not going as far as what I think Protocol, whoever recommended earlier, Aaron, the CEO that got his phone hacked and a few things removed from it. What can we do today? We can't prevent a backdoor into Apple if it does happen, if it already has happened. We can't prevent a backdoor into the chip manufacturers. But what are things that we can do other than, obviously, number one, if you're a scammer listening to this on how you could avoid stuff, don't scam. And in these cases, I like that privacy is dying because people like you get called out. But for people that are just doing the right thing, they want to protect their privacy, what can you recommend?
I'd say just a few things would be use a Chromium browser with that's an open source version of Chrome based browser with good security features. I think Brave is a pretty good one. Has good integration with crypto wallets if you use any of that. I'd say use a privacy focused email. Proton Mail is one of the better ones out there.
I'm assuming most of the audience hasn't got your knowledge level. So when you say Brave and these things, if you can just expand on it a bit more.
Okay, Brave is it's a Chromium-based internet browser. It's open source, has all the features of Chrome, so all the plugins and things from Chrome will work with it. But it's open source, like I said, has better security features. Use a more secure, privacy-focused email. I think Proton Mail is a pretty good one, much better alternative to Google. Use a VPN product of some kind. Commercial one is probably in my opinion, less preferable to something that's more open source. You know, if you really want to go secure, use something like a Tor browser, but that's probably more than, I mean, at that point, it kind of becomes, well, what are you doing that you need to hide? Probably for the average person. But I'd say those are good tips. Just watch what you upload. Just keep in mind that everything you send to a remote third party, regardless of what you do on your end, that third party now has it. So just think of it as like minimizing your footprint, because you can't, can't be zero.
Be careful of what links you click on as well, because links can have
that's the biggest one. Yeah, it's the biggest one. Nothing, download nothing. That's just really important.
I just want to add that, you know, this is one of those things that a lot of people say, what do you have to hide? And part of me was a little bit like that, although I've always been very privacy conscious. But I think, you know, what you, aside from, you know, obviously there is a lot of secure information that people have, you know, that just opens them up to breaches, you know, financial information, things like that. But just the idea, I mean, the things that we thought yesterday that were completely innocent and just normal thoughts, you know, tomorrow become something else. So we just don't know where the world is going. So I think it's important to be aware.
Yeah, it's a silly one. Like this is like, for example, the example that Joa gave, where a friend wanted to buy steroids. He's like, yeah, you can go buy it on Silk Road. So and got probation because of that. Just gives you an example where privacy matters. Another example, along with mine and Ryan's. But yeah, I think. Oh, sorry, Catherine, go ahead. I was muting everyone to wrap it up. My bad. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. No, but even the discourses that a lot of the things we've been talking about, and obviously all the pandemic stuff, I mean, a lot of these narratives are kind of unacceptable by a lot of people these days, or at least a lot of these things were. And I would have never imagined that they would be, you know, a number of years ago. So I think that's important to note, because just the world is always changing. So as much as people like to say, well, you've never committed a crime, or you would never do that, or I would never do that. I mean, I would think that I would never commit a crime, be wanted by any agencies, but it's just the nature of the world is that we just don't know, and we expect it to behave a certain way, and it just doesn't always behave that way that we expect. So it's just very important, and nothing is impenetrable. You know, I think we think that even these secure things, as were just mentioned, I mean, Proton Mail and the browsers, that's also not, you know, foolproof. So it's important to note. Signal, which I like, but it's not foolproof.
As I said, privacy is dead. Makes it official. Justin, you're in late for the space. We're just wrapping up, but great discussion. Slayman, thanks a lot for organizing the agenda. All Source as well. Thanks for co-hosting with Slayman. And I'll see you all tomorrow for the breaking news coverage. Appreciate it, everyone. Bye.